The smell of rotting monster guts hung thick in the air, a cloying mixture of iron and decay that coated the back of Leo's throat. He knelt on the cold stone floor of the guild storage room, a worn-out scrub brush in his blistered hands, working methodically at a patch of gelatinous slime residue. Each stroke sent tiny droplets of the viscous substance flying, some landing on his already stained trousers. The room was dim, lit only by a single flickering mana lamp that cast long, dancing shadows across the stacked crates of monster parts and discarded equipment. From the hallway beyond the open door, laughter echoed, sharp, mocking sounds that made Leo's shoulders tense. He could make out the voices of two hunters, their guild badges gleaming even in the poor light as they paused to watch him work. "Still at it, F-rank," called a broad-shouldered man with a scar across his cheek. "That growth trait of yours really paying off, huh? Bet you're leveling up just scrubbing floors." The other hunter, a woman with her hair tied in a practical bun, snorted. "Growth trait? More like gutter trait. All it does is give what, a tiny stat bump per level. My D-rank fire affinity lets me roast a goblin from 20 paces. What's yours do? Make you better at kneeling?" Leo kept his head down, focusing on the slime stain. His knuckles whitened around the brush handle. He'd heard variations of this taunt every day for the past 6 months, ever since his trait assessment had branded him with the humiliating F-rank classification. Growth, it sounded promising in theory, a trait that supposedly enhanced one's potential over time. In practice, it meant pathetic, almost imperceptible increases to strength or agility with each level, nothing compared to the flashy elemental or combat traits other hunters possessed. To the guild, he was less than useless, he was a waste of resources, fit only for cleaning up after real hunters. "Don't strain yourself, Leo," the scarred man added, his tone dripping with false concern. "We need those floors spotless for when actual hunters bring back real trophies." Their footsteps faded down the hall, leaving Leo alone with the stench and the silence. He sat back on his heels, breathing slowly. The brush dropped from his fingers with a soft clatter. His eyes traced the cracks in the stone floor, each one a map of his frustration. He was 18, supposed to be out in the field, facing monsters, earning his keep, not here, drowning in the offal of others' victories. A plan had been forming in his mind for weeks, a desperate, stupid plan. The guild forbade unranked or low-rank hunters from entering dungeons alone, deeming it too risky. But there was an old, disused low-level dungeon on the outskirts of the city, one that was supposedly cleared out years ago but still occasionally spawned weak monsters like slimes or cave rats. It was off-limits, but Leo had overheard hunters joking about how even an F-rank could probably handle it, if he didn't trip over his own feet. The insult had festered, and tonight, it would become his opportunity. When the guild halls fell quiet, long after midnight, Leo moved. He changed into his least ragged clothes, a simple tunic and trousers, both patched in several places, and retrieved his only weapon from beneath his cot, a rusty dagger with a chipped blade, something he'd found discarded in the storage room months ago. It felt heavy and clumsy in his hand, but it was all he had. He slipped out through a side entrance, the cool night air a shock after the stuffy storage room. The city slept around him, its cobbled streets empty under a sliver of moon. The journey to the dungeon took an hour on foot, each step fueled by a mix of fear and determination. The entrance was exactly as described, a crumbling stone archway half hidden by overgrown vines, leading down into darkness. A faded sign warned, "Danger, unstable dungeon. Entry forbidden." Leo ignored it, his heart hammering against his ribs. He lit a small torch he'd brought, the flame casting erratic shadows on the damp walls as he descended. The dungeon was a single, narrow corridor that opened into a small cavern. The air here was cold and damp, smelling of earth and stagnant water. His torchlight revealed glistening moss on the walls and puddles on the uneven floor. For a moment, he felt a surge of foolish hope. Maybe it was empty. Maybe he could just say he'd been here, get a little experience from exploring, and leave. Then he heard it, a soft, squelching sound, like wet mud being stirred. From a shadowy alcove, something shifted. A gelatinous mass, translucent and shimmering in the torchlight, oozed forward. It was a slime, about the size of a large dog, its body wobbling with each movement. Leo froze, his breath catching. He'd seen slime remains, but never a live one. It was slower than he expected, but it blocked the only exit. His training, what little he'd received, kicked in. He raised the dagger, his grip slippery with sweat. The slime advanced, extending a pseudopod toward him. Leo stumbled back, his boot slipping in a puddle. He fell hard, the torch flying from his hand and sputtering out on the wet stone. Darkness swallowed the cavern, broken only by the slime's faint bioluminescent glow. Panic clawed at his throat. He could hear it moving closer, that awful squelching sound amplifying in the blackness. Scrambling to his feet, Leo swung the dagger blindly. The blade connected with something rubbery and resistant, sinking in slightly before bouncing back. The slime recoiled, then lunged. Leo dodged, but clumsily, his shoulder slamming into the cavern wall. Pain shot through him. He swung again, this time putting all his weight behind it. The dagger struck true, piercing deeper into the slime's core. There was a sickening pop, and the creature shuddered, its glow flickering wildly before dimming. It collapsed into a puddle of inert goo. Leo stood panting, trembling from adrenaline. A notification pinged in his mind, a system message he'd only seen a handful of times during basic training, experience gained. Level up, 2, for a second, relief flooded him. He'd done it. He'd actually killed something. Then the pain hit. It started behind his left eye, a sharp, stabbing sensation that made him cry out. He dropped the dagger, clutching at his face. The pain intensified, spreading like fire through his skull. His vision blurred, then fractured into a kaleidoscope of colors. He fell to his knees, gasping, as something within his eye socket shifted, cracked, and reformed. It felt like shards of glass were grinding against his nerves. He could hear a faint, mechanical whirring in his mind, a sound he'd never heard before, accompanied by a new message, mutation roulette activated. Trait, growth. Result, ocular reconstruction. The agony peaked, then subsided into a dull, throbbing ache. Leo lowered his hands, blinking rapidly. His left eye felt different, heavy, crystalline. When he opened both eyes, the world had changed. Through his right eye, he saw the dark cavern, the puddle of slime, his discarded torch. Through his left, he saw everything. Not just in front, but behind, above, below, a full 360 degrees of vision, all at once, without turning his head. It was overwhelming, a flood of visual information that made him dizzy. He saw the cracks in the ceiling behind him, the tiny insects crawling in the moss to his left, the faint heat signature of the still warm slime residue glowing in shades of orange and yellow. Thermal detection. The images merged in his mind, creating a composite, all-encompassing view of his surroundings. He stumbled to his feet, swaying as he adjusted to the new sense. His left eye was now a multifaceted crystal orb, reflecting the faint light in prismatic sparks. He touched it gingerly, the surface was smooth and hard, like polished quartz, fused seamlessly to his skin. It didn't hurt anymore, but the permanence of it sent a chill through him. This wasn't a stat bump. This was a mutation. A memory surfaced, the guild instructor droning on about trait anomalies, rare cases where traits manifested unpredictably. Was this what growth really was? Not passive improvement, but chaotic, physical change. His new vision zeroed in on the slime puddle. Amid the cooling goo, he spotted a small, dense core, the monster's weak point, still emitting a faint thermal glow. In his earlier panic, he'd struck blindly, but now he could see exactly where to aim. He retrieved his dagger, approached, and with a precise thrust, pierced the core. It dissolved completely, leaving only a stain. Leo spent the next hour in the cavern, testing his mutation. He found he could focus the thermal vision to detect temperature variations in the walls, hinting at hidden passages or dens. The 360-degree sight allowed him to monitor the entire cavern without moving, a huge tactical advantage. But it also meant he couldn't shut it off, the crystal eye was always active, feeding him data. He'd have to learn to filter the input, to focus on what mattered. As dawn's first light began to filter through the dungeon entrance, Leo knew he had to leave before his absence was noted. He climbed back to the surface, his body aching, his mind reeling. The crystal eye caught the sunrise in a burst of refracted colors, a beautiful, terrifying reminder of what he'd become. He staggered into the woods surrounding the dungeon, leaning against a tree to catch his breath. The events of the night played on a loop in his head, the mockery, the slime, the pain, the mutation. He was no longer just an F rank with a useless trait. He was something else, something unpredictable. In the tree lean 50 yards away, a shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness. A cloaked figure stood perfectly still, observing Leo through a pair of enhanced binoculars. The figure watched as Leo touched his crystalline eye, his expression a mix of wonder and horror. A faint, electronic whisper came from a comm device at the figure's collar. Report, Subject F7 has activated. The mutation is, ocular. Proceeding with initial assessment. The chaotic growth engine is operational. The figure didn't move, didn't breathe audibly. It simply watched, a silent sentinel in the growing light, as Leo gathered himself and began to trudge back toward the city, unaware that his first gamble had drawn eyes far more dangerous than any slime. The first gray light of dawn painted the Hunter Guild's stone walls as Leo slipped through the back gate, the chill morning air biting at his exposed skin. He kept his head down, the rough cloth of a makeshift bandage wrapped tightly around his left eye. Beneath it, the crystalline orb pulsed with a faint warmth, its multifaceted surface refracting the dim light in ways his normal right eye couldn't comprehend. He could see everything, the cobblestones beneath his feet, the dew on distant leaves, the heat signatures of early rising hunters moving through the guild hall ahead, all at once, in a dizzying 360-degree panorama that made his stomach churn. He'd spent the walk back from the dungeon practicing, learning to filter the overwhelming input. The thermal vision showed him sleeping forms in nearby buildings, their body heat glowing like embers in the pre-dawn gloom. The 360-degree sight let him watch his own back without turning, tracking the scurrying of a rat 3 alleys over. It was terrifying and magnificent, this gift that had torn itself from his flesh. Just get to the storage room, he thought, his boots scuffing against worn stone. Clean the equipment, act normal, N. A hand clamped on his shoulder, rough and unyielding. Leo flinched, his crystalline eye twitching beneath the bandage. Well, look who's sneaking back at dawn, a familiar voice sneered. Rival Hunter, Leo never bothered learning his name, stood there, his broad frame blocking the narrow alley. He wore the standard guild leathers, but his were newer, cleaner, the mark of someone who actually went on proper hunts. Been out playing hero, F rank? Or just too scared to sleep in the barracks with the rest of us? Leo tried to pull away. Just getting an early start. Early start. Rival Hunter's grip tightened. With a bandage? Let's see what you're hiding. Before Leo could react, the hunter yanked at the cloth. It tore away with a sickening rip, exposing the crystal eye to the morning light. For a moment, there was silence. Rival Hunter's face went slack, his own eyes widening in horror. The crystalline orb gleamed, its facets catching the dawn and throwing prismatic shards across the alley walls. It didn't blink. It didn't look human. What in the hells? Rival Hunter stumbled back, releasing Leo as if burned. Your eye, it's a monster's eye. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. He could see the hunter's heat signature flare with panic, could track the exact moment Rival Hunter's hand went to the knife at his belt. It's just a mutation. My growth trait. Mutation. Rival Hunter's voice rose to a shout. Guards. Someone. Leo's turned into a freak. Within minutes, the courtyard filled. Hunters in various states of dress poured from the barracks, their sleep-creased faces turning to stares of revulsion. Whispers became jeers. Look at his eye. Is that crystal? He's cursed. Monster. The words hit Leo like physical blows. He stood frozen, the crystalline eye showing him every disgusted expression, every pointing finger, in perfect, horrifying detail. He could see the way their body heat spiked with fear and anger, could track the subtle shifts in posture that meant violence was coming. Then the crowd parted, and guild leader strode through. He was a tall man, his face lined with years of command, his guildmaster's insignia gleaming on his chest. His eyes, both normal, human eyes, narrowed as they fixed on Leo's mutated one. Explain this, guild leader said, his voice cold enough to freeze the morning dew. Leo swallowed, his throat dry. My growth trait, it activated in the dungeon. When I leveled up. It gave me this eye. Crystalline sight. I can see everything around me, and heat signatures too. You went into a dungeon alone. Guild leader's tone dropped dangerously low. An F rank, without authorization. He's not just reckless, he's mutated. Rival Hunter cut in, pointing an accusing finger. Look at him. That's not a hunter's trait, that's some dungeon-born abomination. Guild leader stepped closer, his gaze never leaving the crystal eye. Leo could see the man's heat signature, calm, controlled, but with a cold core of anger. We have rules for a reason, Leo. Traits that cause bodily mutations are unstable. Dangerous. The guild cannot harbor a liability. Liability? Leo's voice cracked. It saved my life. I killed a slime with it. And what happens when your next mutation gives you claws? Or fangs? Guild leader's hand rested on the hilt of his own weapon. You become a threat to every hunter here. I should expel you right now. Strip you of your rank and send you to the city watch as a potential monster. The words hung in the air. Leo's mind raced. He could see the crowd's heat signatures, a wall of hostile orange and red. He could see the way the morning light glinted off weapons being loosened in sheaths. He was one wrong move from being cut down right here in the courtyard. Then his crystalline eye caught something. A faint, almost invisible shimmer in the stone archway leading to the main hall. A distortion in the air, like heat haze, but wrong. And beneath it, a cold spot in the thermal vision, a void where there should have been warmth from the stone. Wait, Leo said, his voice suddenly steady. There's a trap. In the archway. Silence fell. Guild leader's eyebrows rose. What? Right there. Leo pointed, his crystal eye focusing. The shimmer resolved into a nearly transparent wire, strung at ankle height across the arch. The cold spot beneath it was a pressure plate, barely visible under a layer of dust. A tripwire, connected to a blade mechanism in the ceiling. It's meant to slice through anyone who walks through. Rival hunter snorted. He's making it up. Trying to distract us. But a hunter named Kale, a broad-shouldered man with a scar across his cheek, was already heading for the arch. He'd been about to step through, to get a better look at the commotion. Stop! Leo shouted. Kale froze, 1 foot raised. He looked from Leo to the archway, then slowly lowered his foot. I don't see anything. Because it's hidden, Leo said. He stepped forward, ignoring the way the crowd tensed. He picked up a loose stone from the ground, hefted it, and threw it underhand at the tripwire. The stone passed through the shimmering air, and the wire snapped taut. With a sharp click, a blade descended from a hidden slot in the ceiling, slicing through the space where Kale's legs would have been. It retracted just as quickly, leaving only a faint whistling sound and the smell of oiled metal. Dead silence. Kale stared at the archway, then at his own legs, then at Leo. His heat signature flooded with delayed adrenaline, a bright, terrified yellow. You saved me. Guild leader's expression didn't change, but Leo could see the subtle shift in his thermal signature, a flicker of calculation, of reassessment. How did you see that? Crystalline sight, Leo said, tapping his mutated eye. It shows me things normal vision can't. Thermal signatures, 360-degree view, enhanced detail. This wasn't a curse, it's an ability. My growth trait doesn't just give passive stats. It mutates me. Randomly. Every time I level up. He let the words sink in. The crowd's jeers had died, replaced by uneasy murmurs. They were still afraid, he could see it in their heat patterns, in the way they edged back, but now there was confusion too. Uncertainty. Random mutations, guild leader repeated slowly. Permanent? Yes. And you have no control over what form they take. No. Guild leader studied him for a long moment. Leo could see the man's mind working, weighing risk against potential. Finally, he spoke. The guild cannot have an unstable element on team hunts. But, you have just proven your mutation has utility. He gestured to the disarmed trap. Kale would be dead or maimed without you. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the assembled hunters. Leo will retain probationary hunter status. But he works solo. No teams, no partners. And his assignments will be, high-risk cleanup. The missions no one else wants. Sewers, abandoned mines, contaminated zones. If his mutations make him a monster, they'll kill him out there. If they make him useful, well, we'll see. It wasn't acceptance. It wasn't respect. But it was a chance. Leo nodded, his crystal eye taking in the mix of relief and lingering disgust on the faces around him. Rival Hunter spat on the ground and stalked away. Kale gave him a hesitant nod before disappearing into the guild hall. Guild leader turned to leave, then paused. Report to the mission board at noon. There's a flood warning in the lower sewers, blockage clearing. Consider it your first probationary assignment. Then he was gone, and Leo was alone in the courtyard, the morning sun climbing higher, his mutated eye showing him every speck of dust, every distant pigeon, every lingering hunter watching from windows with fear in their hearts. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. The rest of the day passed in a blur of muttered insults and averted gazes. Leo collected his assignment from the mission board, sewer clearance, Sector 7, priority due to flooding risk. He gathered what little gear he had, his rusty dagger, a worn leather satchel, a coil of rope, and a hooded cloak to hide his eye from the city's stares. As night fell, he sat in the tiny storage room that served as his quarters, sharpening his dagger by the light of a single candle. The crystalline eye made the work effortless, he could see every microscopic flaw in the blade's edge, every burr of metal. But his mind wasn't on the dagger. It was on the guild leader's words. If his mutations make him a monster, they'll kill him out there. He was about to set the dagger down when a familiar sensation washed over him, a tingling in his veins, a sudden rush of energy that had nothing to do with adrenaline. It was the same feeling he'd had in the dungeon, right before his eye mutated. His system pinged. Level 3 achieved. Leo's breath caught. No. Not now. Not here. A searing, tearing pain exploded in his neck. He gasped, his hands flying to his throat as something ripped through his skin from the inside. He could feel it, wet, slitted openings tearing open along the sides of his neck, just below his jawline. The pain was blinding, white-hot, worse than the eye had been. He stumbled back against the wall, his vision swimming. When the agony subsided, he was left panting, his fingers probing the new flesh. Gills. They were gills, 3 slits on each side, delicate and frilled, pulsing with his heartbeat. He could feel air moving through them, a strange, cold sensation against the warm room. He could breathe through them. Leo staggered to a cracked mirror propped in the corner. In the dim candlelight, his reflection stared back, one crystal eye gleaming, and now, the faint, wet gleam of gills on his neck. He looked less human by the hour. As he stood there, trying to process this new mutation, a distant alarm began to sound, a deep, booming siren that echoed through the guild's stone walls. Flood warning. The sewers. His assignment. Leo's new gills flared, as if tasting the moisture in the air already. He looked at his reflection, at the monstrous changes stacking up on his body, and a wild, desperate thought occurred to him. He could breathe underwater. Just as the guild needed someone to clear a flooded sewer. The sewer entrance yawned like a stone throat, exhaling a damp, chemical-laced breath that made Leo's new gills flutter involuntarily. He stood at the edge, the rusty iron ladder descending into darkness where water gurgled ominously below. The bandage over his crystal eye felt damp already, but he kept it secure. The last thing he needed was someone spotting the unnatural glow in these flooded tunnels. His hand went to his neck, fingers tracing the 3 slits on either side that had torn open during the night. They felt raw, like fresh surgical incisions that hadn't quite healed, and they tingled when the sewer air touched them. Underwater breathing. The mutation had come with level 3, just as the flood warning had sounded for the Eastern District sewers. Coincidence felt like a cruel joke from whatever force controlled his chaotic growth. Leo adjusted the heavy-duty gloves the guild had provided, thick rubber that smelled of disinfectant and mildew. His only weapon remained the same rusty dagger, its edge nicked from the slime fight days before. The guild leader's words echoed in his mind, "Prove you're not a liability, or you're out." This was his probationary mission, clear the main drainage blockage before the flooding reached critical levels. Solo. High risk. Exactly what they'd give to someone they expected to fail. He descended into the gloom. The ladder's rungs were slick with algae and something darker that clung to his boots. 10 feet down, his feet touched water, cold, surprisingly deep. It rose to his waist as he released the ladder, the current tugging at his legs with surprising strength. Leo unwrapped the bandage from his left eye, letting it hang around his neck. In the near-total darkness, his crystal eye activated with a soft internal glow, casting prismatic reflections on the water's surface. Crystalline sight revealed the sewer in layers of information. The thermal layer showed warm spots where pipes discharged wastewater, cooler patches where groundwater seeped through cracks. The 360-degree vision let him see the tunnel stretching 50 yards in both directions without turning his head, a circular conduit of crumbling brickwork, the arched ceiling dripping with mineral formations that glittered in his enhanced sight. Debris floated everywhere, plastic bags, rotting wood, the bloated carcass of something furry. The air tasted of decay and chemicals. Leo took his first breath through the gills. It felt wrong. Not like breathing air through his mouth and nose, that continued automatically, but a separate, parallel sensation. Water flowed through the slits, and he felt oxygen extraction happening at a cellular level, a tingling exchange across membranes that shouldn't exist. The process worked, but the water carried flavors, copper from pipes, ammonia from waste, something bitter and industrial he couldn't identify. His throat tightened in reflex, but his lungs kept drawing air normally. Two respiratory systems working in discordant harmony. He waded forward, the water rising to his chest. The blockage, according to the guild's outdated maps, should be 300 yards east where the main line met an older Victorian-era tunnel. Leo moved cautiously, his crystal eye scanning ahead for structural weaknesses, heat signatures, anything that might indicate danger. The thermal vision picked up clusters of warmth ahead, small, fast-moving blobs hugging the walls. Rats. Dozens of them. But as he drew closer, crystalline sight revealed details normal vision would have missed in the murk. Their bodies showed abnormal heat patterns, hot spots around enlarged teeth, inflamed tissue along their spines. Mutations. Not like his, but something cruder, born of whatever toxins had seeped into these waters over decades. The first attack came from his blind side, or what would have been his blind side before the crystal eye. A rat the size of a small cat launched from a pipe opening, its teeth glowing with unnatural heat in his thermal vision. Leo twisted, the 360-degree awareness giving him just enough warning to bring up his arm. Teeth sank through the rubber glove into his forearm. Pain shot up his arm, sharp and burning. Not just the bite, something in the saliva. Poison. He could feel it spreading, a cold fire moving through his veins. With a grunt, Leo slammed the rat against the brick wall, feeling bones crack. It fell into the water, twitching. More came. They swarmed from crevices and floating debris, their eyes reflecting the faint glow from his crystal eye. Leo backed against the wall, dagger in hand. He slashed at the ones that leaped, his movements clumsy in the chest-deep water. Another rat latched onto his leg, teeth piercing his pants. More poison entered his system. His head began to swim, vision doubling despite the crystal eye's clarity. The mutations were killing him. Not the gills, the poison. His body was adapting to breathe underwater while toxins flooded his bloodstream from above. Leo realized with sudden, desperate clarity that he needed to choose which system to prioritize. He took a deep breath through his mouth and nose, then plunged his head underwater. The world went silent except for the gurgle of currents. Through the murky water, crystalline sight still functioned, the thermal layer showed the rats as bright orange blobs moving along the surface, their heat signatures distorted by the water. The 360-degree vision became even more crucial now that he couldn't turn his head easily. He saw them clustering above, waiting. His gills worked, pulling oxygen from the water. But here was the adaptation, as water flowed through the slits, he realized the membranes weren't just extracting oxygen, they were filtering. He could feel the difference. The bitter chemical taste diminished as the gills processed the water, separating oxygen from contaminants with an efficiency human lungs could never manage. But he needed to breathe through them exclusively. Let his lungs rest. Let the gills handle both respiration and filtration. Leo forced himself to stop breathing through his nose. His body fought the instinct, panic rising as his brain screamed for air through familiar channels. He focused on the tingling sensation at his neck, on the flow of water through the slits. Oxygen reached his bloodstream. Slowly, the dizziness from the poison began to recede. The gills weren't healing him, they were preventing more toxins from entering while his body fought what was already there. He stayed under for 3 minutes. 4. The rats grew bored, some swimming away, others climbing onto floating debris. When Leo finally surfaced, he did so silently, only his crystal eye breaking the water's surface. The thermal vision showed the remaining rats as they scattered, their body heat fading as they retreated into darker tunnels. The poison still coursed through him, but weaker now. Manageable. He waded forward, each movement requiring conscious effort. The blockage came into view, a massive tangle of roots, plastic, and what looked like part of an old carriage wheel jammed into the tunnel's narrowest point. Water backed up behind it, creating a swirling pool that reached the ceiling in places. Leo set to work. With his dagger, he sawed at the thickest roots. With his bare hands, he pulled free plastic sheeting that had wrapped around the wheel spokes. The work was slow, exhausting. Every few minutes, he'd submerge, letting his gills filter the water while he worked below the surface. The dual breathing system became a rhythm, surface for strength and visibility, submerge for filtration and to avoid any remaining rats. Hours passed. His muscles ached. The poison left him nauseated, sweating despite the cold water. But slowly, the blockage gave way. A root snapped. The wheel shifted. With a final heave, Leo pulled the entire mass free, and water roared through the newly opened channel, nearly sweeping him away with the debris. He clung to a rusted pipe as the surge passed, water level dropping rapidly to his knees. The tunnel ahead now flowed freely, wastewater carrying the last of the blockage toward treatment plants far downstream. No level-up notification came. The experience from clearing a blockage was minimal, maintenance work, not combat. Leo slumped against the wall, breathing heavily through both mouth and gills. The raw slits on his neck burned from constant use. His crystal eye ached with the strain of hours of enhanced vision. But he'd done it. Adapted. The journey back to the surface felt longer than the descent. Every step sent jolts of pain through his bitten limbs. The poison, though filtered, still left him weak and trembling. When he finally emerged into twilight, the city's air tasted impossibly clean, almost sterile compared to the complex broth of the sewers. At the guild, he filed his report with a clerk who didn't look up from his ledger. No congratulations. No acknowledgement beyond a stamped "mission complete." Leo collected his meager payment, enough for a week's food if he stretched it. Days passed in a haze of recovery. He rented a tiny room above a butcher shop, the smell of blood and sawdust seeping through the floorboards. The rat bites festered, then slowly healed into raised, pink scars. The poison worked its way out of his system through feverish nights where he dreamed of drowning in glowing green liquid. During the days, he studied his body's changes. The gills remained, permanent, like the crystal eye. They closed slightly when dry, becoming barely visible slits, but reopened the moment they touched moisture. He experimented in a wash basin, timing how long he could stay submerged. 27 minutes before the urge to breathe through his lungs became overwhelming. The filtration worked better in moving water than still. The crystal eye had its own peculiarities. It tired if used continuously for more than 6 hours, after which his vision would blur at the edges. But it never fully deactivated, even closed, he could sense heat signatures through the eyelid, like seeing the world through a thermal blanket. On the fourth evening, as Leo sat cleaning his rusty dagger, a sound at his door made him freeze. Not a knock. A whisper of paper on wood. He waited, crystal eye scanning the hallway through the thin door. No heat signatures. No movement. When he finally opened the door, only an envelope lay on the worn carpet. Plain, unmarked. Inside, a single sheet of paper with elegant, handwritten script. Your mutations interest us. Not as flaws to be mocked, but as possibilities to be understood. The chaotic growth engine operates on principles you cannot yet comprehend. Meet at the abandoned clock tower at midnight if you seek answers. No signature. Only a symbol drawn at the bottom, a spiraling helix, perfect in its geometric precision, looking less like an illustration and more like a diagram of something fundamental. Something alive. Leo stared at the paper until the ink seemed to swim before his eyes. Then he folded it carefully, placed it in his pocket, and went to the window. The city spread out below, a tapestry of lights and shadows. Somewhere out there, the clock tower waited, its broken face forever reading the wrong time. And someone knew about his mutations. Not just the crystal eye, the gills too. Maybe everything. He touched the slits on his neck, still tender. Then the bandage over his left eye. Monstrous liability, the guild leader had called him. But this letter used different words: interest. Possibilities. Understanding. Midnight was 3 hours away. Leo began to prepare. The clock on Leo's cracked wall read 11:45. 15 minutes until midnight. He sat on the edge of his bed, the mysterious letter with its spiraling helix symbol resting on his knees. The paper felt unnaturally smooth, almost synthetic, and the ink shimmered faintly in the dim light of his single bulb. His left eye, the crystalline orb hidden beneath a fresh bandage, thrummed with a low, persistent energy, as if sensing the approaching meeting. He'd spent the day torn between fear and desperate curiosity. The sewer mission had left him with aching muscles and a lingering cough from the toxins, but worse was the gnawing uncertainty. Someone knew about his mutations. Someone had been watching him since that first night in the dungeon. The cloaked figure from the trees, the letter appearing under his door, it was all connected. Answers, the letter promised. The word echoed in his mind. Answers about why his body betrayed him with every level. Answers about the chaotic growth engine he'd only just named. But at what cost? Leo stood, his movements stiff. He wore dark, worn clothes, a faded jacket and trousers that blended with the night. His rusty dagger was tucked into his belt, a pathetic comfort. He considered leaving it behind, but his hand kept returning to its familiar weight. The gills on his neck, now partially healed into pale, ridged scars, itched as he adjusted his collar. He slipped out into the cold night air. The city was a maze of shadows and distant neon, the Hunter Guild's tower looming in the distance like a judgmental sentinel. The abandoned clock tower stood in the old industrial district, a skeletal structure of rusted iron and broken windows. Leo's footsteps echoed on cobblestones slick with recent rain. His crystalline eye, though bandaged, still fed him information, the thermal signatures of rats scurrying in alleys, the cool blue of puddles, the warm orange glow of a distant patrol lantern. He kept to the darkest paths, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. At midnight exactly, he reached the clock tower's base. The massive iron door hung ajar, creaking in the wind. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. Moonlight filtered through broken clock faces, casting jagged patterns on the rubble-strewn floor. Leo's enhanced vision picked up details invisible to normal eyes, the heat residue of recent footsteps leading deeper, the cold void of hidden spaces in the walls. You came. The voice was smooth, almost melodic, and seemed to come from everywhere at once. Leo spun, his dagger half-drawn. A figure detached itself from the shadows near the central gear mechanism. It was the same cloaked person he'd glimpsed in the trees after his first mutation, tall, draped in dark fabric that seemed to drink the light. The hood obscured their face, but Leo's thermal vision showed a human-shaped warmth, calm and controlled. I had little choice, Leo said, his voice steadier than he felt. You know what's happening to me. The figure took a step forward. The chaotic growth engine. A system anomaly so rare, most databases purge its records. You're not cursed, Leo, you're unique. Leo's breath caught. Hearing the name aloud, from someone else's lips, made it terrifyingly real. How do you know that? We've been monitoring trait anomalies for years, the figure said, gliding closer. Leo noticed a subtle shift in their thermal signature, a slight increase in warmth around the hands, as if they were holding something. Your mutations aren't random accidents. They're expressions of latent potential, unlocked by leveling. But without guidance, you'll tear yourself apart. Or be torn apart by those who fear what they don't understand. The guild leader's face flashed in Leo's mind, the disgust, the threat of expulsion. What do you want? To offer you a place, the figure said, their tone softening into something almost paternal. Our organization studies and cultivates unique traits. We can teach you to control the mutations, to channel the chaos. No more mockery. No more cleaning monster guts. Just power, honed and respected. They extended a hand from the cloak. The skin was pale, almost translucent, and marked with faint, silvery scars that formed intricate patterns. Join us. Swear loyalty, and we'll give you the training you need to survive what's coming. For a moment, Leo wavered. The promise was intoxicating: control, respect, answers. His crystalline eye showed him the figure's steady thermal pattern, no spikes of deception. But then he remembered the sewer, the toxic water burning his new gills, the desperate adaptation that had kept him alive. That was his strength, not some organization's training. And loyalty? To what? A shadowy group that hunted people like him? No, Leo said, the word leaving his lips before he fully thought it through. I won't be anyone's experiment or weapon. The figure's hand dropped. The thermal signature cooled slightly. A pity. Subject F7 shows promising defiance. Before Leo could process the designation, F7, like a lab specimen, shadows moved at the edges of his vision. His crystalline eye flared, revealing 3 human-shaped heat signatures emerging from concealed doors in the walls. They moved with military precision, armed with sleek, non-reflective batons that glowed with a faint energy signature in his thermal sight. Guards. Ambush. Take him alive, the cloaked figure commanded, stepping back into deeper shadow. The engine must be studied intact. Leo didn't wait. He bolted, his legs pumping as he dashed toward a gap in the rubble where his eyes showed a cooler draft, an exit. The guards closed in, their movements swift. One swung a baton, Leo ducked, feeling the air crackle past his ear. His crystalline vision gave him a 360-degree view, 1 guard approaching from the left, 2 from the right, the cloaked figure watching from the center. He couldn't fight them. Not with a rusty dagger and no combat skills. But he could run. He focused his thermal sight on the environment, searching for weaknesses. There, a section of wall where the heat signature showed older, crumbling brick. He feinted left, then dove right, shoulder-checking the weakened wall. It gave way in a shower of dust and mortar, revealing a narrow alley behind the tower. Leo stumbled into the open air, coughing. The guards were already pursuing, but the alley was a tight maze of pipes and debris. He used his gills instinctively, taking shallow breaths through them to filter the dust. His eye mapped the route ahead, a chain-link fence, a dumpster, a storm drain. He scaled the fence, the rusty metal biting into his palms, and dropped into the next alley. For 20 minutes, he ran, his enhanced vision spotting every patrol route, every hiding spot. He slipped through gaps too small for his pursuers, used his thermal sight to avoid warm areas where guards might be lying in wait. Finally, crouched behind an overflowing trash bin in a reeking backstreet, he saw the heat signatures retreat, fading into the distance. They'd lost him. He stayed there for a long time, trembling not from exhaustion but from the realization. He was being hunted. Not just mocked or threatened, but actively hunted by an organization that saw him as a subject. His mutations weren't just a personal curse, they were a commodity. Slowly, he made his way back to his rundown apartment, sticking to rooftops and abandoned buildings. The city seemed darker now, every shadow a potential threat. He slipped inside his room, locking the door and barricading it with a chair. The space was small and shabby, a single room with a bed, a cracked sink, and a window overlooking a grimy alley. He sank onto the bed, his mind racing. The cloaked figure's words echoed. Control the mutations. Was that possible? Or was he doomed to be a puppet either for the guild or this shadowy group? He thought of his crystalline eye, his gills. Each mutation had come with pain and disorientation, but also with a strange, brutal utility. He'd adapted. He'd survived. As he sat there, the adrenaline fading, a familiar ping echoed in his mind, a system notification he'd come to dread and anticipate. Level 4 achieved. The experience from evading capture, from surviving the ambush, it had been enough. Agony erupted without warning. It started in his lower back, a searing heat that spread like molten metal along his spine. Leo gasped, collapsing to the floor as his muscles seized. This was worse than the eye, worse than the gills. His vertebrae felt like they were cracking, reforming, elongating. He could hear the grotesque sound of bone grinding against bone, of flesh tearing and knitting itself anew. He writhed, his fingers clawing at the floorboards as something pushed against the skin at the base of his spine. The fabric of his trousers ripped. With a wet, tearing sound, something burst free, a limb he'd never had, thick as his arm and covered in sharp, thorn-like protrusions. It lashed out uncontrollably, a prehensile tail of bone and muscle, smashing into his bedside table. Wood splintered, his few possessions, a chipped mug, a spare bandage roll, scattered across the room. The tail thrashed again, whipping against the wall and leaving deep gouges in the plaster. Leo tried to will it to stop, to curl it harmlessly, but it moved with a mind of its own, a chaotic extension of his panic. It was a weapon, yes, brutal and sharp, but controlling it felt like trying to tame a wild animal attached to his own body. Finally, the agony subsided into a throbbing ache. Leo lay panting on the floor, his new tail twitching sporadically beside him. He stared at it, at the thorns glinting in the weak light. A weapon. But one that might kill him before he ever learned to use it. The morning sun filtered through the dense canopy of whispering woods, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor where Leo stood, his breath forming small clouds in the chill air. His new tail, a thick, muscular appendage covered in wicked black thorns that glinted like obsidian shards, twitched restlessly behind him, as if it had a mind of its own. He'd chosen this secluded spot on the outskirts of the city, far from prying eyes, to practice controlling the mutation that had erupted from his spine the previous night. The tail was heavy, unnervingly so, and every movement felt like wrestling a serpent made of iron and spite. Leo focused, trying to will the tail to coil around a nearby fallen log. Instead, it lashed out violently, the thorns tearing through the bark with a sickening crunch before whipping back toward him. He barely dodged, but the tip caught his left calf, ripping through his trousers and drawing 3 parallel lines of blood that welled up crimson against his skin. He hissed through clenched teeth, the pain sharp and immediate. The tail seemed to revel in the violence, twitching with renewed energy as blood dripped from its thorns onto the mossy ground. "Stupid thing," Leo muttered, pressing a hand to the wound. His crystalline sight, the mutated left eye that gave him 360-degree and thermal vision, flared to life instinctively, showing him the forest in a kaleidoscope of heat signatures and overlapping perspectives. He could see the warmth of his own blood, the cooler tones of the trees, and the distant flicker of small animals. But the tail remained a blind spot in his perception, a part of him that felt alien and unresponsive. He'd spent the first hour simply trying to keep it from smashing into trees or tangling around his legs, but it resisted like a wild beast, each attempt leaving him more bruised and frustrated. He took a deep breath, the gills on his neck fluttering slightly in the damp air. They were a reminder of his last mutation, useful in the sewers, but here, they just felt like another oddity on his changing body. Leo forced himself to stand straight, ignoring the throbbing in his calf. He needed to master this. The guild leader's threat of expulsion still echoed in his mind, and the cloaked figure's ambush had proven he couldn't afford weakness. His mutations were chaotic, but they were his only edge in a world that saw him as a freak. For another hour, Leo practiced basic movements, lifting the tail, swinging it in controlled arcs, trying to coil it around objects without crushing them. Progress was agonizingly slow. The tail would obey for a moment, then spasm unpredictably, sending thorns gouging into tree trunks or his own clothing. Sweat beaded on his forehead, mixing with the blood from fresh scratches on his arms. He was starting to understand the tail's rhythm, a pulsing, almost predatory energy that surged with his emotions. When he grew frustrated, it thrashed; when he calmed himself, it stilled slightly, like a dog settling at its master's feet. Just as he managed to wrap the tail around a thick branch without snapping it, a twig cracked in the distance. Leo's crystalline sight snapped toward the sound, his thermal vision picking up a human-shaped heat signature lurking behind a cluster of ferns about 30 yards away. The figure was crouched, watching him. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. He'd chosen this place for its isolation, but someone had followed him. "Well, well," a mocking voice called out, familiar and dripping with contempt. The figure stepped into view, a hunter from the guild, the same rival who'd exposed his crystal eye back in the hall. He was a lean man with a sneer permanently etched on his face, dressed in standard hunter leathers and holding a short sword loosely at his side. "Look what we have here." Leo the monster, playing with his new toy. "That tail's even uglier than your eye, freak." Leo's tail stiffened, the thorns bristling. He kept his voice level, though anger simmered beneath. "What do you want?" "The guild leader sent me to check on you," the rival hunter said, circling slowly. "Make sure you're not causing trouble with your mutations. But I see you're just out here hurting yourself. Pathetic." He gestured at Leo's bleeding leg. "Can't even control your own body. No wonder they want you gone." Leo's fingers tightened around the hilt of his rusty dagger, still strapped to his belt. He hadn't drawn it yet, but the threat was clear. "I'm on probation. I have a right to train." "Train?" The hunter laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You look like a child stumbling around. That tail's a monstrosity. Let me put you out of your misery." Without warning, he lunged, sword flashing in the dappled light. Leo's crystalline sight tracked the movement instantly, the hunter's heat signature flaring with aggression, the arc of the blade aimed at his chest. Leo threw himself sideways, but his tail betrayed him, lashing out wildly and tangling around his own ankle. He stumbled, the sword grazing his shoulder, tearing fabric and skin. Pain seared through him, but Leo gritted his teeth. He couldn't let the tail control him. As the hunter recovered, smirking, Leo focused all his will on the appendage. He imagined it as an extension of himself, not a separate entity. With a grunt, he whipped it forward, not at the hunter, but at the ground between them, sending up a spray of dirt and leaves to obscure the man's vision. In that moment of confusion, Leo activated his crystalline sight fully, the world shifting into a tapestry of heat and motion. He could see the hunter's every twitch, the way his muscles coiled for another strike. The hunter charged again, sword raised high. This time, Leo was ready. He didn't try to dodge, instead, he commanded his tail to strike. It shot out, not with wild fury, but with a focused, coiling motion he practiced just minutes before. The thorn-covered length wrapped around the hunter's sword arm, the thorns digging deep into leather and flesh. The man cried out, his grip faltering as the sword clattered to the forest floor. Leo yanked, using the tail's strength to pull the hunter off balance. It cost him, the strain made his back ache, and he felt bruises forming where the tail connected to his spine, but it worked. "Get off me, you beast," the hunter snarled, trying to pry the tail loose with his free hand. Blood welled around the thorns. Leo kept his crystalline sight locked on the man, tracking his movements as he struggled. He could see the hunter's heat signature pulsing with panic now, the earlier confidence gone. Leo advanced, tail still entangled, and pressed his rusty dagger to the hunter's throat. "Yield," Leo said, his voice low and steady despite the pain radiating through his body. The hunter glared, hatred burning in his eyes. "You're still a monster. They'll never accept you." "Maybe not," Leo replied, "but I'm not dead yet." He eased the pressure on the tail, letting the hunter stumble back. The man clutched his bleeding arm, face pale. Leo didn't kill him, he'd learned enough about survival to know that murder would only make things worse. Instead, he watched as the hunter scrambled to his feet, snatched up his sword, and fled into the woods, cursing all the way. As the sound of footsteps faded, Leo sank to his knees, exhaustion washing over him. His tail, now slick with blood, both his and the hunter's, curled limply beside him. He'd done it. He'd combined his mutations, the crystalline sight for precision, the tail for raw force. It was messy and painful, but it was synergy. A faint glow enveloped him, the familiar sensation of experience settling into his bones. He was close to level 5 now, so close he could almost taste it. But as he caught his breath, a new sensation crept in, a dull, deep ache in his forearms, starting at the wrists and spreading upward. It wasn't the sharp pain of injury, but something more insidious, like bones grinding beneath the skin. Leo stared at his arms, his crystalline sight showing no visible change yet, but the ache persisted, throbbing in time with his heartbeat. A cold dread settled in his stomach. This was how it always began, a precursor, a warning of the next mutation. He thought of the crystal eye, the gills, the tail, each one more violent and unpredictable than the last. What horror would emerge next? Would it be something useful, or just another curse to wrestle with? The forest seemed to grow quieter around him, as if holding its breath, and Leo wondered if his body would ever feel like his own again. The pain began as a dull ache in his forearms, the same sensation he'd felt after defeating his rival in Whispering Woods. Leo lay on his thin mattress in the rented room, staring at the water-stained ceiling as the discomfort deepened into a sharp, grinding pressure. He'd learned to recognize these signs, the body's warning before another piece of itself rearranged. He didn't sleep. Instead, he watched through the night as the skin over his forearms tightened, turning pale and translucent like stretched parchment. Beneath the surface, something shifted with audible cracks, the sound of dry branches breaking underfoot. By dawn, his arms had swollen to twice their normal size, the flesh hot and throbbing with each heartbeat. When the final transformation came, it was swift and brutal. Leo gasped as twin lines of agony split his skin from wrist to elbow. Blood seeped, then stopped as white bone pushed through the openings, extending beyond his fingertips in smooth, curved blades. They weren't like knives, they were part of him, growing from his very skeleton, their edges honed to a razor's sharpness that caught the morning light. For an hour, he simply sat on the floor, breathing through the residual pain as the wounds sealed themselves. The bone blades retracted with a thought, sliding back into his forearms until only their tips protruded from his wrists like strange knuckles. When he extended them again, they unfolded with a soft click, 18 inches of deadly white extending from each arm. He needed space. The forest called. Whispering woods greeted him with its usual silence, the trees standing like sentinels in the gray morning light. Leo found a clearing where he wouldn't be seen and began testing the blades. The first swing at a young pine tree sent wood chips flying, the bone sliced through bark and sapwood with almost no resistance. But when he tried to make precise cuts, to carve rather than cleave, the blades trembled in his hands. They responded to his intentions with a delay, as if his nervous system hadn't fully integrated their existence. Like learning to walk again, he thought, watching as an attempted delicate slice instead took a chunk from a fallen log. The impact sent vibrations up his arms, making his teeth ache. He practiced for hours, extending and retracting the blades until the motion became fluid, learning to compensate for their weight and balance. By midday, he could make controlled cuts, though his arms burned with fatigue from the constant microadjustments. He was cleaning pine sap from the blades when the guild messenger found him. The young man, Leo didn't know his name, approached cautiously, eyes widening at the sight of the bone protruding from Leo's wrists. "The officer wants you," the messenger said, keeping his distance. "Said you've been missing assignments." Leo retracted the blades, the bone sliding back into his forearms with a soft hiss. The messenger flinched at the sound. The guild hall felt different when he entered. Hunters who usually ignored him now watched from the corners of their eyes, their conversations dropping to whispers. The officer, a broad-shouldered man with a permanent scowl, waited at the mission board, tapping a rolled-up parchment against his palm. "Where have you been?" the officer demanded without preamble. "Training," Leo said, keeping his voice level. "Your probation requires regular check-ins. The guild leader's patience is thinning." The officer unrolled the parchment. "Since you're so eager for solo work, here's your next assignment. Stonehaven Quarry. Monster infestation reported. Clear it out." Leo took the parchment. The description was sparse: rock-type creatures, possible golem variants, moderate threat level. No backup assigned. No mention of his rank limitations. "Alone?" he asked. "You wanted to prove yourself, didn't you?" The officer's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Consider this your opportunity." The walk to Stonehaven Quarry took the rest of the afternoon. The landscape changed from forest to rocky foothills, the air growing dry and dusty. The quarry appeared as a massive scar in the earth, a bowl-shaped excavation half a mile across, its walls terraced with abandoned mining platforms. At the bottom, stagnant water reflected the fading daylight in oily rainbows. Leo descended carefully, his crystalline sight activating automatically. The world shifted into thermal gradients, cool blues for the stone, warmer yellows where sunlight had baked the rocks, and occasional hot spots that moved. His left eye, the crystal orb, gave him a 360-degree view as he turned his head, catching movement behind him without needing to look. He found the first golem near a collapsed tunnel entrance. It stood 7 feet tall, its body composed of fitted stones held together by some unseen force. When it moved, the rocks ground against each other with a sound like grinding teeth. Leo extended his bone blades. The golem turned, empty eye sockets fixing on him. The fight was less about strength and more about timing. Leo used his tail first, the prehensile, thorn-covered appendage whipping out to wrap around the golem's leg. Thorns scraped against stone, finding purchase in cracks between rocks. As the golem stumbled, Leo darted in, his crystalline sight highlighting a weak point where 2 stones met at the creature's chest. He drove a bone blade into the gap. The impact jarred his arm from wrist to shoulder, a shock of pain that made him grit his teeth. But the blade went deep, and something inside the golem cracked. The stones fell apart, collapsing into a harmless pile. Experience flowed into him, a tangible warmth that spread through his limbs. Not enough for a level, but close. More golems emerged as he pressed deeper into the quarry. Some were smaller, quicker. Others were massive, their fists capable of crushing boulders. Leo adapted, learning their patterns. He used his tail to trip them, his crystalline sight to find vulnerabilities, and his bone blades to strike when openings appeared. Each successful hit sent fresh pain through his arms, the vibrations of stone on bone accumulating until his hands trembled. By the 10th golem, he developed a rhythm: distract with the tail, circle to find the weak point, strike fast and retreat. His movements became more precise as fatigue forced economy. He learned to retract the blades between strikes to conserve energy, extending them only at the moment of impact. The largest golem waited at the quarry's deepest point, near a pool of murky water. It stood nearly 10 feet tall, its body studded with quartz crystals that caught the last of the daylight. When it moved toward him, the ground shook. This one was smarter. It ignored Leo's tail strikes, its stone body too solid for the thorns to find purchase. When Leo tried to circle, it anticipated his movement, a massive fist slamming down where he'd been about to step. Leo retreated, breathing hard. His arms ached from previous fights, the bone blades feeling heavier with each extension. He studied the golem through his crystalline sight, looking for patterns in its thermal signature. There, a cluster of heat deep in its chest, pulsing with rhythmic intensity. A core of some kind. He needed to get close enough to strike it. The golem charged, surprisingly fast for its size. Leo dove sideways, his tail lashing out to catch on a protruding rock, swinging him around in an arc. As he came around, he extended both blades, aiming for the golem's back. The impact was like hitting a mountainside. One blade snapped against stone, the broken tip flying off into the darkness. Leo cried out as pain exploded up his arm, white-hot and nauseating. But the other blade found its mark, sinking into a crack between stones near the creature's shoulder. The golem roared, a sound of grinding rock, and backhanded him across the quarry. Leo hit the ground hard, skidding through gravel until he slammed against a mining cart. His vision swam, blood trickling from his nose. Through the haze, he saw the golem approaching, its damaged shoulder leaking something that glowed with soft blue light. The experience from the near-kill flooded into him. Warmth spread through his battered body, knitting cracked ribs, soothing bruised muscles. He felt the familiar surge that meant a level 6. He braced for the next mutation, for some new part of himself to erupt and reshape. Nothing happened. No pain. No transformation. Just the level-up energy dissipating through his system, leaving him stronger but unchanged. The system had lagged before, but never this long. A cold fear settled in his stomach. What if the mutations had stopped? What if he was left with these half-integrated abilities, forever out of sync with his own body? The golem was almost upon him. Leo pushed himself up, his remaining bone blade extending with a thought. The broken one retracted, the stump aching where it had sheared off. He'd have to make do with one. This time, he didn't wait for the golem to attack. He charged, using his tail to propel himself forward in a burst of speed. The golem swung, but Leo was already under the blow, sliding between its legs. As he passed beneath, he drove his single blade upward into the creature's chest, aiming for the thermal core his crystalline sight had shown him. The blade sank deep. Blue light erupted from the wound, bathing the quarry in an eerie glow. The golem froze, then began to crumble, stones falling away from whatever energy had held them together. Leo collapsed beside the dissolving creature, breathing in ragged gasps. His arms felt like they'd been beaten with hammers, every muscle protesting. He retracted the remaining blade, watching as the bone slid back into his forearm. The broken one stayed retracted, he could feel the jagged end inside him, a wrongness that made his skin crawl. For a long time, he just lay there, staring at the darkening sky. Stars began to appear, pinpricks of light in the deepening blue. He should get up, should leave before more creatures emerged. But his body refused to obey, exhaustion weighing him down like stones in his pockets. He was drifting towards sleep when the first tremor came. The ground beneath him shifted, a deep rumble that started in his bones and worked its way up. Gravel danced on the quarry floor. Somewhere in the distance, rocks tumbled from the terraced walls. Leo pushed himself to his knees, his crystalline sight scanning the darkness. The thermal signatures were all wrong, the cool blues of stone were warming, turning orange and red in a spreading wave from the quarry's deepest pit. The second tremor was stronger. The mining cart beside him tipped over with a crash of rusted metal. Water in the stagnant pools sloshed over their edges. Then the earth split. A section of the quarry floor heaved upward, stone and dirt exploding outward as something massive pushed through. Leo scrambled back, his tail lashing wildly for balance as the ground buckled beneath him. What emerged was longer than the mining platforms were tall, a segmented body thicker than a mature oak, covered in plates of stone that gleamed wetly in the starlight. A head the size of a carriage lifted from the rupture, eyeless but with a maw that gaped wide enough to swallow a man whole. Inside that darkness, something glowed, a sickly green light that pulsed with malevolent energy. Acid dripped from its jaws, sizzling where it struck stone. The creature, a WIRM, but mutated beyond any natural form, turned its head slowly, as if tasting the air. Then it oriented directly toward Leo. The maw opened wider, the green glow intensifying until it lit the entire quarry in an emerald nightmare. Leo could see down its throat, could see the acid building there, gathering for a torrent that would melt stone and flesh alike. His bone blades were broken. His arms screamed with pain. His mutations had failed to trigger at level 6. And before him stood a creature that shouldn't exist outside the deepest dungeons. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a thought surfaced, cold and clear, this is how I die. Then the WIRM struck. The world dissolved into emerald fire. Leo barely registered the WIRM's maw glowing with that sickly green light before instinct screamed at him to move. He threw himself sideways, the rusty dagger forgotten in his hand as he scrambled for cover behind a jagged outcropping of quartz-laced rock. Acid hit the stone where he'd been standing a heartbeat earlier. The corrosive spray didn't just sizzle, it screamed, a high-pitched shriek of dissolving minerals that sent shards of superheated rock flying. Leo pressed himself flat against the cool stone, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Then pain blossomed along his spine, sharp and sudden. He twisted, his crystalline eye catching the sight before his normal one could process it. A stray droplet of acid had caught the tip of his prehensile tail. The thorns there were melting like wax, the flesh beneath bubbling and blackening. Move, 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 his mind screamed. He yanked the tail close, the damaged section twitching uncontrollably. The pain was a white-hot brand against his nervous system, but worse was the smell, burnt flesh mixed with something chemical and wrong. The WIRM wasn't done. Its massive bulk, easily 3 times Leo's height and 10 times his length, shifted in the quarry's central pit. Scales the color of tarnished copper scraped against stone with a sound like grinding bones. Leo's crystalline eye activated without conscious thought, the world shifting into overlapping spectrums. Thermal vision showed the WIRM as a pulsating core of heat, its internal furnace burning hot enough to melt stone. The 360-degree view revealed everything at once, the trembling ground, the scattered remains of rock golems, the narrow crevices in the quarry walls. And the WIRM's blind spots. There were 2, Leo realized with a surge of desperate hope. Directly behind its head, where the armored plates overlapped in a way that limited its peripheral vision, and along its underbelly where it dragged against the ground. Small targets, both of them. Suicide to approach with acid spraying everywhere. Another gout of acid arced toward him. This time, Leo was ready. He dove not just sideways but downward, rolling into a shallow depression left by a fallen golem. The acid passed overhead, splattering against the quarry wall and sending up clouds of acrid smoke. The fumes hit him next, thick, yellow-green vapors that burned his nostrils and made his eyes water. His normal eye stung, but the crystalline one simply adjusted, filtering the visual distortion. Then he remembered, the gills. The slits along his neck that had felt useless since their mutation. He took a shallow breath, testing. The gills fluttered, drawing in air. It wasn't comfortable, the toxic fumes still irritated the sensitive tissues, but he could breathe without coughing. He held what breath he could in his lungs, the gills working to extract what little clean air remained in the smoky quarry. Okay, he thought, the plan forming in fragments. Can't fight it head-on. Bone blades won't penetrate those scales, not with one already broken. Tail's damaged. But I can see where it can't. And I can breathe when it can't. He moved, keeping low. The WIRM tracked him, its massive head swinging on a neck thicker than Leo's entire body. Another acid spray forced him behind a pillar of stone. This time, he didn't just hide. As the acid ate into the pillar, Leo extended his right arm. The bone blade slid from his forearm with a wet, clicking sound. The broken left one remained retracted, a dull ache reminding him of its fragility. When the WIRM paused to draw breath for another attack, Leo struck. Not at the WIRM itself, that would be madness, but at the ground near it. He slashed the bone blade against a loose cluster of quartz crystals embedded in the floor. The impact sent painful vibrations up his arm, but the crystals shattered, sending sharp fragments skittering toward the WIRM's underbelly. The beast flinched, its scales rattling. Not a wound, but an irritation. A distraction. Leo repeated the process, moving constantly, using his crystalline sight to track the WIRM's attention. When it focused on one side of the quarry, he'd chip at rocks on the other, sending debris clattering against its armored hide. When it turned to spray acid, he'd already be moving, his gills working overtime as he held his breath through the worst of the fumes. It was exhausting. Every movement cost him. The damaged tail dragged, throwing off his balance. The broken bone blade arm throbbed with each impact. But he was surviving. And he was learning. The WIRM's attacks grew more frantic, less accurate. It was a creature of brute force, used to melting its prey where they stood. It didn't understand an enemy who refused to stand still, who attacked from angles it couldn't properly see. Then Leo saw it, a narrow crevice in the quarry's western wall, barely wider than he was. The WIRM had scraped against it earlier, leaving streaks of copper-colored scale behind. It was a tight fit even for Leo. For the WIRM. He changed tactics. No more chipping at rocks. Now he baited. He let the WIRM catch glimpses of him near the crevice, then darted away at the last second. He used his tail, painful as it was, to slap against stones, creating noise that drew the beast's attention. The WIRM took the bait. With a roar that shook dust from the quarry walls, it charged. Not with acid this time, but with raw, crushing weight. It wanted to pin him, to crush him against the stone. Leo waited until the last possible second. The WIRM's heat signature filled his crystalline vision, a tidal wave of living furnace. He could smell its breath, acid and rot and deep earth. Then he dove, not away from the crevice, but into it. The stone walls scraped against his shoulders, his damaged tail catching painfully. He squeezed through, emerging into a small, natural chamber on the other side. And he turned just in time to see the WIRM's head slam into the crevice's entrance. For a moment, nothing happened. The WIRM thrashed, trying to pull back. But its momentum had been too great, its bulk too wide. The armored plates around its head caught on the jagged stone. It roared again, the sound muffled by the rock, and sprayed acid blindly. The green liquid hit the crevice walls, eating into the stone but not reaching Leo in his shelter chamber. It was stuck. Leo didn't hesitate. He climbed. Using handholds in the rock, his damaged tail providing what balance it could, he scaled the quarry wall beside the trapped WIRM. He reached a ledge directly above the beast's struggling head. From here, he could see the vulnerable spot his crystalline sight had identified earlier, the gap in the armor plates at the base of its skull. The WIRM sensed him. It tried to look up, but its position limited its movement. Acid bubbled in its maw, but it couldn't angle the spray upward. Leo took a deep breath through his gills, ignoring the burn of residual toxins. He focused on his tail. The damaged section hung limp, but the base still had strength. He willed it to move, to coil, to prepare. Then he dropped. Not onto the WIRM's head, that would have been suicide. He dropped beside it, onto a narrow outcropping just behind its trapped neck. The WIRM felt the impact, thrashing harder. Stone cracked around its head. Now. Leo's tail lashed out. Not with the damaged tip, but with the thick, muscular base. It wrapped around the WIRM's neck, just below the armor plates. The thorns that remained dug into scale and flesh. The WIRM screamed, a sound of pure, animal fury and pain. And Leo pulled. He pulled with everything he had. With the strength of levels gained through survival. With the desperation of someone who'd been mocked, hunted, and mutated beyond recognition. He pulled, and the WIRM's head twisted against the stone that trapped it. There was a terrible cracking sound, not of rock but of something organic giving way. The thrashing stopped. The WIRM went limp, its massive body slumping against the quarry floor. The heat signature in Leo's crystalline eye faded from blazing white to dull red, then to nothing. He released his tail, stumbling back. Every part of him hurt. His tail was a mess of burnt and melted flesh. His arms trembled from holding the bone blade extended. His lungs burned from holding breath after breath in toxic air. But he'd done it. Then the system pinged in his mind, a sensation he'd come to both dread and anticipate. Level 7 achieved. The fire in his lungs wasn't just from exertion or toxins anymore. It was mutation. He gasped, doubling over as his chest convulsed. His gills fluttered wildly, then stilled as something changed deeper inside. The burn spread through his bronchial tubes, down into the alveoli. It felt like breathing ground glass, then like breathing clean, cold water. When it passed, he took an experimental breath. The acrid quarry air still smelled foul, but it didn't burn. His lungs filtered it now, extracting oxygen while neutralizing the toxins. He could breathe here, properly, without relying solely on the gills. He was about to collapse when movement caught his crystalline eye. Not the WIRM, it was definitely dead, its heat signature gone. But nearby, partially buried in the rubble the fight had created, something glowed with faint biological heat. Eggs. 3 of them, each the size of his head, covered in the same tarnished copper scales as their parent. And one of them was twitching. A crack appeared along its surface, glowing with the same sickly green as the WIRM's acid. Something inside pushed against the shell, determined to hatch. Leo stared, his new lungs drawing in clean breaths from poisoned air, his mutated body aching in a dozen places, as the egg shuddered and split open. The WIRM's corpse still steamed in the quarry's dim light, its acid breath fading to acrid mist. Leo knelt beside the broken eggs, his mutated lungs drawing in air and filtering the lingering toxins with a soft, rhythmic wheeze. The effort was minimal now, a background hum in his chest, but his attention was fixed on the single intact egg. It trembled, cracked spiderwebbing across its leathery surface. He should have crushed it. The thought came cold and practical. This creature had nearly killed him, its offspring would be no different. But his hand, still bearing the retractable bone blades that had shattered against quartz golems, hesitated. The blades retracted with a wet click, leaving his forearm scarred and oddly smooth where bone met flesh. He watched, mesmerized, as a tiny snout pushed through the shell. Then the egg burst. Not 1, but 3 hatchlings tumbled out, each the size of a large dog, scales still slick with embryonic fluid. Their eyes were milky white, unseeing, but their heads snapped toward Leo with instinctual hunger. He scrambled back, his prehensile tail lashing out instinctively to create distance. The movement was smoother now, weeks of practice in whispering woods had tempered its wild thrashing into something he could almost control. Almost. But the hatchlings didn't attack him. Instead, they turned toward the deeper shadows of the quarry, where a low moan echoed off stone walls. Leo's crystalline eye, the left one, permanently transformed into a faceted orb, pulsed with thermal vision. The world shifted into gradients of heat, the cooling WIRM corpse a fading orange, the hatchlings bright yellow blobs of newborn life, and, 30 yards away, a human-shaped figure slumped against a rock, its heat signature weak and flickering. A miner, trapped during the earlier quakes. The man's leg was pinned under fallen rubble, blood seeping into the dust. The hatchlings scuttled toward him, their movements jerky but fast. Leo's breath hitched. He could leave. The guild would never know. He could report the WIRM slain, collect whatever meager reward they'd grant an F rank, and retreat to lick his wounds. But the miner's moan came again, a raw sound of pain that cut through the quarry's stillness. "Damn it," Leo whispered, his voice raspy from filtered toxins. He moved. His body was a patchwork of mutations now, the crystalline eye with its 360-degree view, the gills along his neck that fluttered uselessly in dry air, the thorn-covered tail that swept behind him like a third limb, the bone blades waiting in his forearms, and the new lungs that wheezed as they scrubbed venom from the air. He felt less like a hunter and more like a monster assembled from spare parts. But the parts worked. The hatchlings reached the miner first. They didn't roar like their parent, they hissed, high and needle-sharp, and lunged. Their teeth were tiny but gleamed with fresh venom. The first bite sank into the miner's arm. The man screamed, thrashing weakly. Leo's crystalline eye tracked everything. He saw the venom as a cold blue fluid entering the miner's bloodstream, saw the hatchling's heat signatures flare with feeding excitement. His new lungs kicked into higher gear, filtering not just airborne toxins but now preparing for venom. He could feel the organ expanding, capillaries straining as it anticipated poison. It drained him instantly, a wave of fatigue washed over his muscles, as if he'd sprinted for miles. He didn't have time for fatigue. His tail snapped forward, thorns glinting in the dim light. It wrapped around the nearest hatchling's midsection and yanked. The creature squealed, scales tearing against thorns, and flew backward to slam into a boulder. Leo didn't wait to see if it rose. His bone blades extended with twin shicks, the sound like swords drawn from sheaths of flesh. They ached where they'd broken earlier, phantom pains in regenerated bone, but they held. The second hatchling turned on him, milky eyes somehow locking onto his heat signature. It spat. A glob of venom arced through the air. Leo ducked, the venom splattering against stone where it sizzled and ate into the rock. His lungs wheezed louder, filtering the microscopic droplets that misted the air. Each breath cost him, his stamina bled away like sand through fingers. He lunged, blades aimed. The hatchling was fast, dodging, its claws scraping against his leather armor. Pain bloomed along his ribs. Leo gritted his teeth, using his crystalline eye to predict the next dodge. He saw the heat shift in the creature's muscles before it moved. He feinted left, then drove his right blade up through its soft underjaw. The hatchling died with a gurgle, venom dripping harmlessly from its mouth. 2 down. The third was still worrying at the miner's leg, its bites shallow but numerous. The miner's heat signature was fading, cooling toward blue. Leo's tail lashed out again, this time with precision born of desperation. The thorns dug into the hatchling's flank, and he hauled it away. It twisted, biting at the tail, venom seeping into the thorny appendage. Leo felt the poison as a cold numbness spreading up the tail, but his lungs filtered it, converting the venom to harmless compounds that he exhaled as bitter vapor. The cost, his legs trembled, and black spots danced at the edge of his vision. He couldn't afford drawn-out combat. With a roar that was half pain, half fury, he drove both bone blades into the hatchling's skull. It went limp. Silence fell, broken only by Leo's ragged breathing and the miner's weak whimpers. For a long moment, Leo just stood there, blades retracting slowly, blood and venom dripping from his hands. His body felt alien. The lungs wheezed on, a constant reminder that he was breathing filtered poison. The tail hung limp, already healing from the venom bites but aching dully. The crystalline eye showed him the quarry in stark thermal detail, the dead hatchlings cooling, the miner's life flickering, his own body a riot of overheated exertion. He looked at his forearms, where the bone blades had retracted, leaving only raised scars. How much of him was still human? The question echoed in his skull, unanswered. He shook himself and stumbled to the miner. The man was middle-aged, face streaked with dust and pain, his leg crushed under a slab of quarry stone. "Hold on," Leo muttered, his voice unfamiliar to his own ears, raspy from filtered air. He braced himself, tail coiling around the slab for leverage, and heaved. Muscles strained, his new lungs burning with the effort, but the stone shifted enough to free the leg. The miner cried out, then slumped into unconsciousness. Leo worked quickly, using strips of his own cloak to bind the worst wounds. The venom bites were already swelling, but his lungs had filtered most of the poison. The miner would live, though he'd bear scars. When it was done, Leo sat back against the rock, exhaustion weighing him down like chains. No surge of experience came. No level up, no mutation. Just the aftermath of violence and the slow, cold realization that saving a life meant nothing to the system that governed his world. It only rewarded killing. The miner stirred an hour later, as dawn's first light crept into the quarry. His eyes focused on Leo, taking in the crystalline eye, the gills, the tail now curled defensively. Instead of fear, the man's expression softened with gratitude. You saved me," he croaked. Leo nodded, too tired to speak. "They said you were a monster," the miner whispered. "But monsters don't save miners." Leo helped him stand, supporting his weight as they limped from the quarry. The journey back to the guild was silent, the miner's gratitude a warm weight against Leo's growing coldness. He'd saved a life. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like confirmation. He was becoming something else, something that didn't fit in the guild's neat ranks and stable traits. His mutations were tools, yes, but they were also a prison, reshaping him into a creature of chaos. They reached the guild hall as the sun fully rose. The building loomed, its stone walls etched with symbols of order and rank. Leo left the miner with the healers, receiving a nod of thanks but no praise from the guild staff. They eyed his mutations with barely concealed distaste, the crystalline eye that saw too much, the gills that fluttered at his neck, the tail that twitched nervously. He was turning to leave, to retreat to his sparse room and sleep for a week, when the guild officer appeared. Not the guild leader, but a stern-faced woman with sharp eyes and a permanent scowl. She blocked his path, her gaze sweeping over him like he was a specimen on a slab. "Leo," she said, her voice devoid of warmth. "Your unauthorized mutations have been noted. The guild cannot harbor a hunter whose body is unstable." Leo's heart sank. "I just saved a miner. I killed a WIRM. And in doing so, you revealed your aberrations to civilians," the officer snapped. "The guild's reputation depends on reliability. Your growth is unpredictable. A liability." She thrust a scroll into his hands. Leo unrolled it, his crystalline eye scanning the text faster than his human eye could. It was a mission brief: infiltrate the haunted forest dungeon, retrieve the heartwood artifact from its depths, and return within 7 days. The dungeon was known for its psychic traps, mutated flora, and a guardian that had killed A-rank hunters. It was a death sentence. "Do this," the officer said, "and your mutations will be tolerated. For now. Fail, or refuse, and you will be expelled from the guild. Your hunter license revoked. You'll be nothing but a monster in the streets." She turned and walked away, her boots echoing on the stone floor. Leo stood frozen, the scroll crumpling in his grip. The guild hall buzzed around him, hunters laughing, missions being posted, a world of order and ranks that had no place for him. His mutations itched, a phantom chorus in his blood. The crystalline eye showed him the heat of the guild fading as he stepped outside, into the cold morning air. The haunted forest waited, a green maw on the horizon. And Leo, with his patchwork body and aching heart, had no choice but to walk into it. The haunted forest loomed before Leo like a living wall of shadows. Mist clung to the gnarled trunks of ancient trees, swirling in patterns that seemed to watch him. He stood at the edge where sunlight died, his crystalline left eye already pulsing with discomfort. The guild's ultimate deadline, 7 days to retrieve the heartwood artifact or lose everything, pressed against his ribs like a physical weight. He stepped into the fog. Immediately, his crystalline sight flared with ghostly echoes. Thermal vision showed heat signatures that weren't there, phantom blobs of warmth that flickered between trees. The 360-degree view, usually a tactical advantage, became a dizzying kaleidoscope of false movement. A deer's heat signature would appear, then dissolve into cold mist. A patch of glowing ground would vanish when he blinked. The forest was playing tricks on his mutation, and Leo gritted his teeth, forcing himself to focus on what was physically present. The ground beneath his boots was soft with decay. Moss-covered roots twisted like serpents, and the air tasted of damp earth and something else, something metallic and old. He moved cautiously, his prehensile tail twitching behind him, the thorns along its length catching on low-hanging branches. Then the vines attacked. They didn't move like normal plants. One moment they were draped innocently from an oak's branches, the next, they whipped toward him with startling speed. Leo ducked, his tail instinctively lashing out to wrap around a nearby birch. He swung himself upward just as 3 vines snapped where he'd been standing. The motion was jerky, unpracticed, his tail wasn't designed for acrobatics, but it held his weight as he landed on a thick branch 15 feet up. From this vantage, he saw the forest floor was a tapestry of traps. Glints of metal, old hunter snares, peeked through the leaf litter. Pitfalls disguised with woven branches. Tripwires strung between trees, some still holding skeletal remains. This place had claimed many before him. He moved through the canopy, using his tail to swing from tree to tree. Each grab sent vibrations through his spine, the thorns digging into bark. Below, vines continued to writhe, searching for him. One lashed upward, wrapping around his ankle. Leo didn't hesitate, he activated the bone blades in his forearms. They slid out with a wet, clicking sound, the broken one on his left arm jagged and uneven. He sliced through the vine, and it fell away, oozing black sap that smelled of rot. The forest grew thicker. Fog turned to proper mist, and with it came spores, tiny, glittering particles that filled the air. Leo felt them catch in his throat, his lungs tightening. He remembered his gills, the slits along his neck that he'd learned to use underwater. Could they work here? He focused, forcing his body to switch breathing methods. For a terrifying moment, he couldn't draw air at all, then his gills flared open, filtering the spore-filled mist. The tightness in his chest eased, though the air he processed tasted foul, like mushrooms left to ferment. He pressed deeper. Days passed in a blur of cautious movement. He slept in tree hollows, his crystalline sight providing watch through the night. He drank from streams after filtering water through his toxin-processing lungs, a slow, deliberate process that left him thirsty but alive. The forest's patterns began to make sense. The vines attacked most aggressively at dawn and dusk. The ghostly echoes in his vision were strongest near certain twisted trees that seemed to pulse with faint energy. The traps were concentrated along what might have been old hunting paths. On the fourth day, he found the clearing. It was circular, unnaturally so, with no trees growing within 50 feet of the center. There, on a pedestal of moss-covered stone, sat the heartwood artifact. It wasn't what he'd expected, not some ancient wooden relic, but a crystal about the size of his fist, glowing with a soft, internal light that shifted between green and gold. It pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat. Leo dropped from the trees, landing silently. His tail coiled defensively behind him. He approached step by step, every sense heightened. The forest had gone quiet, no bird calls, no rustling leaves. Even the ghostly echoes in his vision had stilled. He was 3 steps from the pedestal when the guardian appeared. Not as a physical form at first, but as a presence. The air grew cold. Shadows pooled around the clearing's edge, thickening into something tangible. A voice whispered from everywhere and nowhere, a sound like wind through dead leaves, forming words he couldn't quite understand but whose meaning chilled him: intruder, thief, unworthy. Leo froze. His bone blades were extended, his tail poised to strike. But there was nothing to strike. The guardian was spirit, not substance. Then it attacked. Not with claws or teeth, but with pressure. An invisible force slammed into him, driving him to his knees. It felt like the entire forest was pressing down, trying to crush him into the earth. His gills strained for air that wasn't there. His crystalline sight showed nothing, no heat signature, no physical form. He had to move. Rolling sideways, he broke the pressure's focus for a moment. The guardian shifted, and vines at the clearing's edge lashed toward him, guided by unseen hands. Leo sliced through them with his bone blades, but for every one he cut, 2 more took its place. He was being herded, pushed back toward the trees. Think, he told himself. His mutations were tools. How could they work against something without a body? He remembered the forest's patterns. The ghostly echoes in his vision were strongest near certain trees, trees that seemed to anchor the forest's unnatural energy. What if the guardian drew power from them? What if it wasn't one spirit, but many, tied to this place? He stopped fighting the vines defensively. Instead, he used his tail to grab one, yanking it toward him. As more vines wrapped around his limbs, he didn't struggle, he let them pull him toward the nearest twisted tree at the clearing's edge. The guardian's pressure intensified, confused by his lack of resistance. When he was close enough, Leo struck. Not at the vines, but at the tree itself. His bone blades, even the broken one, dug into the bark. Black sap oozed out, and the tree shuddered. The pressure lessened slightly. It was working. He repeated the process over hours that felt like days. Lure the vines, get dragged to an anchor tree, damage it, repeat. His body ached. His mutations were straining, his gills felt raw from filtering spore-filled air, his bone blades vibrated painfully with each impact, his tail was losing its grip strength. But he adapted. He used his crystalline sight to identify which trees pulsed with the most energy, targeting those first. He breathed through the foul air in shallow, controlled breaths. He fought not with brute force, but with patience, wearing down the guardian's connections to the forest. Finally, after what might have been a full day of this grueling dance, the pressure vanished. The vines fell limp. The whispering stopped. Leo staggered to the pedestal, sweat and black sap streaking his skin. He reached for the crystal. His fingers brushed its surface. Warmth flooded through him, not the heat of battle or exertion, but something deeper, resonating in his bones. The crystal's light brightened, pulsing in time with his own heartbeat. For a moment, he felt connected to the forest, to the very earth beneath him. Then a familiar, long-awaited ping echoed in his mind. Level 8 achieved. Relief washed over him, followed immediately by dread. The mutation was coming. It started at his shoulders, a crawling sensation like insects beneath his skin. Then hardening. His flesh tightened, darkened, forming plates that spread across his chest, down his arms, over his back. Chitinous armor, segmented and rough, covering him like a second skeleton. It wasn't painful, exactly, but deeply unsettling, as if his body was being remade without his consent yet again. He barely had time to process the change when the clearing darkened. The shadows that had pooled at the edges rushed inward, coalescing around the pedestal. They thickened, gained substance. Bark formed from darkness, roots dug into the earth, branches sprouted like grasping hands. The guardian was no longer spirit. It stood before him now, a twisted treant, 15 feet tall, its body a mass of gnarled wood and thorns, eyes glowing with the same green-gold light as the crystal. One limb ended in a claw of sharpened branches, another held a mass of writhing vines. It didn't speak, but its intent was clear, the artifact was not leaving this clearing. And Leo, with his new chitinous plate still settling into place, faced it alone. The trench roar shook the forest clearing, a sound like splintering timber and grinding stone. Leo barely had time to register the transformation, the guardian spirit coalescing into physical form, before the ground erupted around him. Massive root tendrils, thick as his torso and covered in moss and splintered bark, burst from the earth. They moved with terrifying speed for something so massive, whipping through the air with enough force to create audible cracks. Leo threw himself backward, his prehensile tail instinctively coiling around a nearby tree trunk to yank him out of the way. The tendrils slammed into where he'd been standing, pulverizing stone and sending clods of dirt flying. His new chitinous skin plates, hard, overlapping segments that covered his torso, arms, and legs, tingled with the impact of debris. The mutation from reaching level 8 felt strange, like wearing armor that was part of him, yet he could feel the faint vibrations through the plates. He landed awkwardly, his crystalline left eye already scanning the treant. The creature stood 3 times his height, a twisted amalgamation of wood, stone, and glowing green energy. Its body was a trunk of dark, gnarled wood, with limbs that ended in grasping root clusters instead of hands. Where a face might have been, there was only a hollow filled with swirling green light. Through his thermal vision, Leo could see the heat signature, cool wood warmed by that inner energy, except for one spot near the center of its chest. There, pulsating with intense heat, was the heartwood core. So that's the weak point, Leo thought, his mind racing even as he dodged another sweeping tendril. The treant wasn't just attacking randomly, it was hurting him, the roots creating a cage around the clearing. Each time he tried to move toward the heartwood artifact, which still glowed on its stone pedestal, the treant would block his path with a wall of roots. A tendril caught him across the shoulder. The impact sent him spinning, pain blooming through the chitinous plates. He heard a distinct crack, not the plate breaking, but something giving way beneath it. The armor had absorbed most of the force, but the sheer power behind the blow still rattled his bones. He rolled, coming up with his bone blades extended from his forearms. The ivory-white protrusions gleamed in the forest's eerie light. Defensive isn't going to work, Leo realized. The treant was too powerful, too relentless. His mutations might let him survive individual hits, but they were chipping away at him. Already, he could feel bruises forming beneath the chitin, and his stamina was draining from constant evasion. The treant raised both root clusters, bringing them down in a crushing overhead smash. Leo didn't try to dodge this time. Instead, he activated his gills, the slits along his neck flaring open. The air in the clearing was thick with dust and pollen from the treant's movements, but his toxin-filtering lungs could handle it. More importantly, the gills gave him better oxygen intake. He needed every advantage for what came next. As the roots descended, Leo dropped into a crouch, then sprang upward. Not away from the attack, but toward it. His prehensile tail, covered in thorns and flexible as a whip, shot out and wrapped around one of the descending root clusters. He used the momentum to swing himself up, his bone blades digging into the treant's wooden arm as he climbed. The treant roared again, shaking its limb to dislodge him. Leo held on, his tail tightening its grip, the thorns digging deep into the wood. Through his crystalline eye, he could see the thermal patterns shifting, the tray ant was redirecting energy to the arm he clung to, the wood growing hotter. It's trying to burn me off, he thought, scrambling higher. His boots found purchase on bark that felt more like stone than wood. Each movement was deliberate, calculated. He wasn't just climbing, he was observing, analyzing. The Trent's other arm came around, trying to swat him like an insect. Leo ducked, his bone blade scraping along the creature's torso as he moved. Chips of bark flew, revealing the darker wood beneath. The tray ant flinched, not from pain, but from something else. Disturbance. Damage. It doesn't like its bark being damaged, Leo noted. The realization sparked a plan, dangerous and desperate, but the only one he had. He let go with his tail, dropping several feet before catching himself with his bone blades dug into the Trent's side. The impact jarred his arms, but he held on. Below, the ground was a maze of writhing roots. If he fell now, he'd be crushed or impaled. Crystalline sight, show me everything, he whispered to himself, focusing his mutated eye. The world shifted into overlapping thermal layers. The Trent's core pulsed like a green sun in its chest. The roots glowed with flowing energy. And there, patterns. The energy flowed from the core through specific channels in the wood, like veins in a living thing. Leo began to climb again, not toward the core, but along one of those energy channels. His bone blades weren't just for stabbing, they were tools. He used them like climbing picks, chipping away at the bark as he went. Each chip disrupted the energy flow, causing the tray ant to shudder. The creature redoubled its efforts to dislodge him. Roots shot up from below, trying to wrap around his legs. Leo kicked them away, his tail lashing out to break their grip. One root managed to wrap around his ankle, yanking hard. He felt something pop in his joint, pain shooting up his leg. His chitinous plates protected his skin from being torn, but they couldn't stop the joint from being wrenched. Gritting his teeth, Leo brought his other foot down on the root, his boot crushing it against the Trent's body. The root went limp, releasing him. But the distraction cost him, the Trent's hand closed around him, root fingers tightening like a vice. The pressure was immense. Leo heard his chitinous plates groan, cracks spreading across their surface. He couldn't breathe, the gills flared, but the Trent's grip was crushing his chest. Spots danced in his vision. No, he thought, the word a silent scream in his mind. Not like this. Not after everything. He remembered the mockery at the guild. The cleaning of monster guts. The way they'd looked at his mutations with disgust. The ultimatum, retrieve the artifact or lose everything. He remembered the miner's grateful face in the quarry. The WIRM's eggs hatching. The feeling of leveling up, of his body changing, becoming something else, something more. With a final effort, Leo twisted in the Trent's grip. His bone blades, extended to their full length, stabbed into the creature's wooden fingers. Not to cut through, the wood was too thick for that. But to create leverage. He pushed, muscles straining, every mutation working in concert. His tail wrapped around the Trent's wrist, pulling. His gills gasped for what little air they could find. His toxin-filtering lungs burned with the effort. And his chitinous plates, cracked but still holding, bore the crushing pressure. The Trent's grip loosened, just enough. Leo exploded outward, breaking free. He fell, but not helplessly, his tail caught a lower branch, swinging him in a wide arc. He landed hard, pain shooting through his injured ankle, but he was moving before the impact fully registered. He didn't retreat. He charged. Straight at the Trent's chest, where the heartwood core pulsed. The creature seemed surprised by the direct assault. It raised its arms to block, but Leo was already changing direction, his tail hooking around a root to change his trajectory. He wasn't trying to avoid the Trent's defenses, he was using them. A root swung at him. Instead of dodging, he let it hit him, the impact sending him flying toward the Trent's torso. He twisted in midair, bone blades extended like spears. They struck the bark above the core, not piercing it, but digging in. Leo hung there, suspended, as the tray ant roared and tried to shake him off. He held on, his tail wrapping around the creature for additional support. Now, he thought. He began to climb again, but this time with purpose. Not just chipping bark, but systematically damaging the energy channels around the core. His bone blades scraped and gouged, each strike disrupting the flow. The Trent's movements became jerky, uncoordinated. The green light in its hollow face flickered. The core was exposed now, a section of wood that glowed from within, warm to the touch even through his chitinous plates. Leo raised his right arm, bone blade poised to strike. The Treant made one final effort. All the roots in the clearing surged upward, converging on Leo. There was no dodging this, it was a cage closing around him. He didn't try to escape. He drove the bone blade forward, putting all his weight, all his strength, every ounce of desperation into the thrust. The blade pierced the wood. Not deeply, the heartwood was dense, resistant, but enough. Green light erupted from the wound, blindingly bright. The Trent's roar became a shriek of splitting wood and dying energy. The roots froze in mid-air, then collapsed, crumbling to dust before they hit the ground. Leo fell with the Treant, hitting the ground hard enough to knock the wind from him. He lay there, gasping, his gills working overtime. The chitinous plates on his chest were cracked in several places, and he could feel blood seeping through where the underlying skin had been bruised and torn. His ankle throbbed with every heartbeat. But he was alive. The Treant lay motionless, its body already beginning to decay, wood turning to soft rot. The green light in its hollow face faded to nothing. For a long moment, there was only the sound of Leo's ragged breathing and the normal sounds of the haunted forest returning, the whisper of leaves, the distant call of some unseen bird. Then the system pinged in his mind. Level 9 achieved. Experience points, 850/1000 to next level. Mutation triggered, static discharge. Leo stared at the notification, not quite comprehending. Level 9. He'd done it. He'd survived. And another mutation. Before he could process it, electricity arced from his fingertips. Tiny blue-white sparks danced across his hands, crawling up his arms. He could feel the charge building in his muscles, a strange, buzzing energy that made his hair stand on end. It wasn't painful, just unfamiliar, another change in a body that was never the same from one day to the next. He pushed himself to his feet, wincing as his injured ankle protested. The heartwood artifact still glowed on its pedestal, untouched by the battle. 7 days. He'd made it with time to spare. Limping, he approached the artifact. The crystal pulsed with a soft, warm light, intricate patterns carved into its surface seeming to shift as he watched. This was what the guild wanted. This was his ticket to staying a hunter, to not being cast out as a monster. His hand, still crackling with static electricity, reached for the crystal. Fingers closed around smooth, warm stone. And a voice spoke from the edge of the clearing. Time to come with us, Subject F7. Leo froze, the artifact halfway to his pouch. He turned slowly, his crystalline eye already scanning. They stood in a semicircle at the edge of the clearing, 5 figures in dark, form-fitting armor that seemed to drink the light. Their faces were covered by featureless masks, except for the leader, who stood slightly ahead of the others. This one wore a cloak over his armor, the hood thrown back to reveal a sharp-featured face with cold eyes and a smile that didn't reach them. Behind the leader, the other 4 agents had weapons drawn, not conventional blades, but devices that glowed with restrained energy. They moved with practiced coordination, spreading out to cover all angles of escape. The leader took a step forward, his smile widening. You've been quite the interesting subject to observe, Leo. Or should I call you by your designation? F7 has a certain elegance to it, don't you think? Electricity crackled from Leo's fingertips, wild arcs of blue-white energy that danced unpredictably in the humid forest air. His hands trembled, not from fear, though that was present too, but from the raw, untamed power surging through his newly mutated nerve endings. The shock of it traveled up his arms, a sharp, biting sensation that made his teeth clench. Before him stood 6 figures in dark tactical gear, their faces obscured by featureless masks that reflected the dim glow of the heartwood artifact still clutched in Leo's left hand. The leader, taller than the others, took a step forward. His voice emerged distorted through a vocal modulator, but the words were chillingly clear. Subject F7, the leader said, the designation hanging in the air like a curse. The chaotic growth engine has exceeded projections. Surrender peacefully, and your mutations will serve a greater purpose. Leo's crystalline eye, the left one that had started this whole chaotic journey, scanned the agents. His 360-degree vision showed 3 more closing in from behind, moving with practiced silence through the undergrowth. Thermal imaging painted them as cool blue shapes against the warmer greens and browns of the forest, but their equipment glowed with concentrated heat signatures. Suppression tech, just as the outline had warned. What purpose? Leo managed to say, his voice rough from the Treyant battle. He shifted his weight, feeling the ache in his wrenched ankle protest. The cracked chitinous plates on his shoulders and chest grated against each other with the movement. Harvesting, the leader replied simply. Your trade is a resource. One we intend to weaponize. One of the agents raised a device that looked like a cross between a rifle and a syringe. Leo didn't wait for an explanation. He dropped the heartwood artifact, it could wait, and lunged sideways as electricity erupted from his hands. The discharge wasn't aimed, it couldn't be. Blue-white tendrils lashed out in all directions, one catching the device-wielding agent square in the chest. The man convulsed, his equipment sparking and smoking, but another arc rebounded and struck Leo's own forearm. Pain blossomed, sharp and familiar now, the scent of ozone and burnt flesh filling his nostrils. Chaos erupted. Leo's prehensile tail, thick and covered in thorns that had saved him more times than he could count, whipped around, not to attack, but to anchor. It wrapped around a low-hanging branch, and he yanked himself upward just as two more agents fired. Projectiles thudded into the tree trunk where he'd been standing, emitting a low hum that made the air vibrate. Crystalline sight, show me the way, he thought, the mental command as instinctual as breathing now. His mutated eye adjusted, filtering through the forest's persistent fog. The thermal echoes that had plagued him earlier now became his map. He could see the cooler paths, the areas where the ground dipped or rose, where thickets would slow pursuit. He swung from the branch, his tail releasing at the last moment to send him crashing through a curtain of hanging moss. Behind him, the agents moved with unsettling coordination, their footfalls nearly silent on the damp forest floor. Cut off his retreat, the leader barked, his modulated voice cutting through the forest sounds. Leo landed hard, his injured ankle screaming in protest. He rolled, coming up with bone blades extended from his forearms. The familiar weight of them was comforting in a way nothing else was anymore. Two agents closed in, wielding crackling batons that emitted the same low hum as the projectiles. He parried the first strike, bone meeting energy with a shower of sparks. The vibration traveled up his arm, making his teeth rattle. The second agent swung low, aiming for his legs. Leo's tail swept out, not fast enough to trip the man, but enough to make him stumble. In that moment of imbalance, Leo drove a bone blade forward. It didn't pierce armor, the agent's gear was too good for that, but it scraped across the chest plate with a screech that set Leo's teeth on edge. Electricity leapt from his other hand, uncontrolled, wild. It arced into the agent's faceplate, short-circuiting something with a pop and a hiss. The man staggered back, clawing at his mask. But the retaliation came swift. A baton connected with Leo's side, right where the chitinous plates were cracked. The impact drove the air from his lungs, and he felt something give way beneath the armor. A rib, maybe. The pain was a white-hot lance that made his vision swim. He stumbled backward, using his tail to catch himself against a tree. Breathe, he told himself. Use the gills. He forced air through the slits on his neck, bypassing his aching lungs. The oxygen came cooler, cleaner, cutting through the pain just enough to keep him moving. He's adapting, one of the agents reported, voice tinny through comms. Suppress the mutations, the leader ordered. Target the neural pathways. Another device was raised, this one emitting a pulse that made Leo's head throb. His crystalline eye flickered, the thermal imaging cutting in and out. For a terrifying second, he was blind on that side, the world reduced to ordinary sight from his right eye alone. Panic threatened to rise, but he shoved it down. Panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. He focused on what he had left, the tail, the blades, the unstable electricity, the armor that was failing but still there. He ran. Not away blindly, but with purpose. His crystalline sight cleared in bursts, showing him a path through a particularly dense thicket of thorn bushes. The agents would have to go around or cut through, either would buy him time. He dove into the thicket, thorns tearing at his clothes and skin. The chitinous plates protected his vital areas, but his arms and legs were soon crisscrossed with bleeding scratches. Behind him, he heard the agents cursing as they encountered the same barrier. Go around. Flank him, the leader shouted. Leo pushed forward, his breath coming in ragged gasps that he forced through his gills. The air here was thick with spores from strange fungi growing on fallen logs, but his toxin-filtering lungs handled it without issue. One less thing to worry about. He emerged from the thicket into a rocky area where the trees thinned. A stream cut through the stones, its water dark and swift. Leo's eyes, both of them now working properly again, scanned the area. There, to the left, a crevice in the rock face, partially hidden by hanging vines. A cave. He made for it, his injured ankle threatening to buckle with every step. Electricity crackled from his hands again, this time short-circuiting a small drone that had been tracking him from above. It fell from the sky in a shower of sparks, but not before he felt another of those neural pulses. This one was stronger. It hit him like a physical blow, dropping him to his knees. His mutation seemed to rebel, the bone blades retracted involuntarily, his tail went limp, even his gills fluttered closed for a terrifying moment. He gasped, ordinary air burning in his lungs. "Got him," an agent called out. "No. Not like this." Leo focused everything on the electricity. He didn't try to control it, he'd learned that was impossible in these early moments of a new mutation. Instead, he let it build, let the charge accumulate in his hands until they glowed with contained energy. Then, as two agents closed in, he slammed his palms together. The discharge wasn't directed outward. It exploded inward and around him in a sphere of crackling energy. The agents were thrown back, their equipment sparking and dying. But Leo took the brunt of it too. The electricity raced up his arms, burning through nerve endings, making his muscles seize. The smell of his own burnt flesh filled his nostrils again, stronger this time. But it worked. The neural suppressor must have shorted out too, because his mutations returned in a rush. Bone blades snapped back into place. His tail twitched, then coiled. His gills opened, pulling in blessed, filtered air. He didn't wait. He scrambled to his feet and half ran, half stumbled to the cave entrance. Behind him, he could hear the agents recovering, their leader barking orders that were growing fainter with distance. The cave mouth was narrow, forcing him to turn sideways to enter. Inside, the darkness was absolute until his crystalline eye adjusted, painting the world in shades of thermal blue and cold stone gray. He moved deeper, his footsteps echoing in the confined space. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only minutes, he collapsed against a wall, sliding down to sit on the cold stone floor. His body was a tapestry of pain, the cracked chitinous plates, the wrenched ankle, the burnt hands from his own electricity, the possible broken rib, the countless cuts from the thorns. He sat there in the dark, listening. No sounds of pursuit reached him. Either they'd lost him, or they were waiting outside. Either way, he had a moment to breathe. His thoughts turned to what the leader had said. Harvesting. Weaponizing his trait. The chaotic growth engine, they knew its name. They'd been watching, studying. The realization settled in his gut like a stone. This wasn't random. They'd targeted him specifically. He looked down at his hands. In the thermal vision of his crystalline eye, they glowed with residual heat from the electrical discharge. The skin was blistered and raw. He'd have to be more careful with that mutation. If he survived long enough to learn to control it. A bitter laugh escaped him, echoing strangely in the cave. Survival. That's what it always came down to. Surviving the monsters, surviving the mockery, surviving his own body's chaotic evolution, and now surviving an organization that wanted to tear him apart for parts. He leaned his head back against the wall, closing his ordinary eye. The crystalline one remained open, scanning the cave automatically. It was larger than he'd first thought, extending back into the mountain. The walls were smooth in places, too smooth to be natural. Curiosity overcoming exhaustion, he pushed himself to his feet, using the wall for support. He limped deeper into the cave, his tail dragging behind him, leaving a faint trail in the dust. The cave opened up into a chamber. And there, illuminated by the faint bioluminescence of fungi growing in cracks, were the murals. Leo froze, his breath catching in his throat. The walls were covered in intricate paintings, faded with age but still recognizable. Figures with multiple arms, with wings, with tails, with eyes that glowed even in the painted depiction. Hunters. Mutated hunters. He stepped closer, his injured ankle forgotten for a moment. One mural showed a battle, mutated hunters facing off against monstrous creatures that looked like nothing he'd seen in modern dungeons. Another showed a city, beautiful and strange, with spires that reached impossible heights. A third showed the hunters gathered around what looked like an altar, their mutations on full display. They were like him. Not exactly, their mutations seemed more controlled, more intentional, but the principle was the same. Body changes. Adaptations. Evolution. "How old is this?" he whispered, the sound swallowed by the cavern's immensity. He reached out, his burnt fingers hovering over a depiction of a hunter with crystalline eyes very similar to his own. The painting was meticulous, capturing the multifaceted nature of the eyes perfectly. As his fingers nearly brushed the ancient pigment, a ping sounded in his mind. Not a sound, exactly, but a sensation, a notification that he'd come to recognize. Level 10 achieved. The words hung in his consciousness for a split second before the pain hit. It started between his shoulder blades, a deep, tearing sensation as if something was trying to rip its way out of his body from the inside. He cried out, the sound echoing off the stone walls. His back arched involuntarily, muscles spasming. Then came the sound, a wet, tearing crunch as bone and flesh rearranged themselves. Something pushed against the inside of his skin, stretching it to the breaking point. His shirt, already torn and bloodied from the battle, split down the back with a sound like ripping canvas. And they emerged. Wings. Not feathered, not leathery like a bat's, but something in between, membranous stretches of skin supported by bony struts that gleamed faintly in the cave's dim light. They unfolded from his back with a series of pops and cracks that made his jaw clench against a scream. The pain was immense, blinding. But beneath it, there was sensation, new nerves firing, new muscles twitching as they learned their purpose. He could feel the wings, really feel them, as extensions of himself. He flexed experimental muscles, and the wings responded, flapping once with a whoosh of air that stirred the dust on the cave floor. He could fly. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. All his life, he'd been grounded, limited by his human body. Now he had wings. He looked up, a wild, desperate hope rising in his chest. But it died just as quickly. The cave ceiling was low here, barely twice his height. And it wasn't smooth, stalactites hung like stone teeth, ready to impale anything that rose too fast. Worse, as his wingtips brushed the walls, he felt the stone shudder. A fine dust sifted down from above. Cracks, ancient and deep, spiderwebbed across the ceiling. It was crumbling. And he was trapped beneath it with wings he couldn't use, in a cave that might collapse at any moment, with an organization hunting him outside, and ancient murals staring down at him with the faces of those who had walked this path before. He stood there, wings still partially unfolded, breathing through the pain and the panic, and wondered what fresh chaos the next level would bring. The cave air tasted of damp earth and ancient stone, thick with the dust Leo's wings had stirred when they first erupted from his back. He lay on the cold floor, breathing raggedly as the initial shock of the mutation subsided. His back ached where new muscle and bone had torn through flesh, the sensation a familiar yet always terrifying reminder of the chaotic growth engine's work. Slowly, he pushed himself up, wincing as the movement pulled at the fresh wounds. The wings, featherless, leathery membranes stretched over a framework of bone, twitched involuntarily behind him. In the dim light filtering through the cave entrance, they looked alien against his patchwork body, the chitinous plates covering his shoulders and chest, the crystalline eye glowing faintly, the gill slits along his neck still moist from his panicked breathing. Can't stay here, he thought, his mind racing. The shadowy organization's agents would be searching the forest. The heartwood artifact, a smooth crystal that pulsed with warm light, lay beside him where he dropped it. He picked it up, the weight comforting in his burned hands. The skin there was blistered and raw from his uncontrolled static discharge, another reminder of how little control he had over this chaos. He turned his attention to the wings. They were large, spanning nearly twice his height, but the cave ceiling was low and jagged. One wrong move could bring rocks down on him. Testing them cautiously, he flexed the muscles in his back. The wings responded, flapping weakly and stirring up more dust. The motion sent sharp pains through his injured rib, but he gritted his teeth. First, just stand. He rose unsteadily, the wings dragging on the ground. Their weight was substantial, throwing off his balance. With a deep breath, he focused on lifting them, feeling the strange new muscles contract. The wings rose, trembling with the effort. He took a step forward, then another, walking in a slow circle around the cave. The wings bumped against the walls, scraping stone. Outside. Need to get outside. The cave entrance was a narrow crack in the rock, barely wide enough for him to squeeze through without the wings. He paused, considering. His prehensile tail, thorn-covered and flexible, twitched behind him. An idea formed. Using the tail, he gripped a protruding rock and pulled himself up, his feet finding purchase on the rough wall. The wings folded awkwardly against his back as he climbed, his bone blades extending from his forearms to chip handholds where none existed. After several minutes of painful climbing, he emerged into the haunted forest. Dawn was breaking, pale light filtering through the twisted trees. The fog that had plagued his journey here was thinner now, but his crystalline sight still showed ghostly thermal echoes, remnants of the forest's magic. He stood on a rocky outcrop, the forest stretching below him. This was his chance. Spreading the wings wide, he felt the morning breeze catch the membranes. They trembled, but held. He took a running start and leaped from the edge. For a heart-stopping moment, he plummeted. Then the wings caught air, and he was gliding, not flying, but moving forward with a grace that surprised him. The wind rushed past his face, cool against his gills. He banked slightly, using subtle shifts in his body weight to steer. Below, the forest passed in a blur of green and gray. He could see the clearing where he'd fought the Treant, the scorched earth from his static discharge, the trampled undergrowth from his escape. But the glide couldn't last forever. As he descended, he realized he had no idea how to land. The ground rushed up, and he crashed through branches, the wings tangling in vines. He hit the forest floor hard, rolling to absorb the impact. Pain exploded through his body, the cracked chitinous plates on his chest groaned, his wrenched ankles screamed in protest, and his wings were scraped and torn. He lay there, breathing heavily. But he was alive. And he'd moved faster through the forest than ever before. Over the next hours, he practiced. Short glides from tree to tree, using his prehensile tail to swing into position. Each attempt taught him something: how to angle his wings for lift, how to fold them quickly to avoid obstacles, how to use his other mutations in tandem. By midday, he could glide reliably for hundreds of meters, covering ground that would have taken him days on foot. The journey back to the city was a blur of pain and determination. He avoided main paths, sticking to remote areas where his monstrous appearance wouldn't cause panic. His mutations, once a source of shame, now felt like tools, each one serving a purpose. The gills filtered the dusty air of the plains he crossed, the chitinous armor protected him from scrapes and falls, the crystalline sight scanned for threats, and the wings, though clumsy, carried him over rivers and ravines. When the city walls came into view, he landed in a secluded copse of trees outside the gates. Folding his wings tightly against his back, he pulled a tattered cloak from his pack, one he'd scavenged from the cave, and draped it over himself, hiding the worst of his mutations. The heartwood artifact was wrapped in cloth and secured to his belt. The guild hall loomed ahead, its stone facade familiar and intimidating. As he pushed through the doors, the usual chatter died. Hunters turned to stare. Some whispered, others openly pointed. He could hear the words, "Freak, monster, what happened to him?" He ignored them, walking straight to the guild leader's office. The door was open. The guild leader, a stern woman with graying hair and eyes that missed nothing, looked up from her desk. Her expression shifted from surprise to calculation as she took in his appearance. The cloak couldn't hide everything. "Leo," she said, her voice neutral. "You're alive." He placed the heartwood artifact on her desk. The crystal pulsed with light, casting shadows across the wood. "I retrieved it. Within 7 days." She picked it up, examining it. "And the haunted forest? The Guardian? Defeated?" He didn't elaborate. The details of his mutations, of the shadowy organization, those were cards he wasn't ready to play yet. The guild leader set the artifact down. "Impressive. Few F-ranks could accomplish this." She leaned forward. "But you're not just an F-rank anymore, are you? Your body, it's changed." Leo met her gaze, his crystalline eye glowing faintly. "My growth trait isn't what everyone thought." She nodded slowly. "I've heard rumors. Mutations. Some in the guild are calling you a danger. She stood, walking to the window. But you completed the mission. That earns you something. She turned back. Effective immediately, you have full hunter status. No more cleaning monster remains. You'll receive proper assignments, payment, guild protection. Relief washed over him, so intense it made his knees weak. But it was short-lived. The door burst open. A man strode in, the corrupt officer, his face twisted with malice. He was flanked by two hunters Leo recognized as his lackeys. You can't be serious, the officer spat. Look at him. He's not a hunter, he's an abomination. His mutations are unstable, dangerous. He pointed a finger at Leo. I've seen the reports from the haunted forest. Electricity, wings, armor plates. This isn't natural growth, it's chaos. He turned to the guild leader. If you grant him status, you'll make us all laughingstocks. The public will riot. He raised his voice, shouting so those outside could hear. Leo is a monster. His body is a patchwork of horrors. The guild leader's eyes narrowed. This is my decision. Then let the people decide, the officer yelled. He grabbed Leo's cloak, yanking it off. The wings unfurled partially, the chitinous plates gleamed in the light, the crystalline eye shone brightly. Gasps echoed from the hallway where hunters had gathered to listen. Chaos erupted. Within hours, word spread through the city. Crowds gathered outside the guild hall, their voices a mix of curiosity and fear. Mutant hunter. Freak. Is he safe? The guild leader, faced with mounting pressure, made a compromise. You will demonstrate your abilities, she told Leo. In the training arena. Controlled conditions. Show that you're not a threat. The arena was a circular pit of packed earth, surrounded by stone benches. It was usually used for sparring matches, but today it was packed with spectators, hunters, citizens, even children peering through the railings. The air buzzed with tension. Leo stood in the center, his mutations on full display. Opposite him was a challenger, a burly hunter named Kale, who had volunteered to test the freak. Kale wore reinforced leather armor and carried a blunt training sword. His expression was a mix of disgust and confidence. No killing, the guild leader announced from her podium. Disable only. The bell rang. Kale charged immediately, swinging his sword in a wide arc. Leo didn't move until the last moment, then his prehensile tail shot out, wrapping around Kale's ankle and yanking him off balance. Kale stumbled, but recovered quickly, slashing at the tail. Leo retracted it, his bone blades extending from his forearms with a sharp click. He didn't attack. Instead, he waited, letting Kale come to him. His crystalline sight tracked every movement, the thermal overlay showing the heat of Kale's muscles coiling and releasing. When Kale lunged, Leo sidestepped, his wings flapping once to give him extra momentum. He moved behind Kale and tapped his shoulder with a bone blade, not cutting, just touching. Point to Leo, the guild leader called. Kale snarled, turning and charging again. This time, Leo used his static discharge. Electricity crackled from his fingertips, arcing through the air. It wasn't enough to seriously hurt, he'd learned to control it somewhat since the forest, but it made Kale's muscles seize up. The hunter dropped his sword, convulsing for a second before collapsing to the ground. Leo didn't press the advantage. He stepped back, letting Kale recover. The crowd murmured, some impressed, others horrified. Kale got up, shaking off the effects. He was angrier now, less careful. He charged again, this time aiming for Leo's wings. Leo spread them wide, not to fly, but as a distraction. As Kale focused on the wings, Leo's tail shot out again, this time wrapping around Kale's wrist and twisting. The training sword clattered to the ground. In the same motion, Leo stepped forward, his bone blades retracting as he used his chitinous forearm to block a wild punch. The impact echoed in the arena. With Kale disarmed and off balance, Leo moved in close. He didn't strike. Instead, he used his wings to envelop Kale briefly, blocking the crowd's view. When he stepped back, Kale was on the ground, pinned by Leo's tail and one foot on his chest. The hunter struggled, but couldn't break free. Yield, Leo said, his voice calm. Kale glared, but after a moment, nodded. The crowd was silent. Then, slowly, applause began, not thunderous, but respectful. Some hunters nodded, others still looked wary. But the fear in their eyes had shifted, replaced by a grudging acknowledgement of skill. After the demonstration, the guild leader granted him his hunter license officially. But the victory felt hollow. As he left the arena, he could feel eyes on him, some curious, some hostile. The corrupt officer watched from the shadows, his expression unreadable. Leo returned to his small room in the guild's barracks. It was sparse, a bed, a desk, a mirror on the wall. He stood before the mirror, looking at his reflection. His body was a tapestry of mutations, the crystalline eye, the gill slits, the chitinous plates covering his chest and shoulders, the wings folded against his back, the prehensile tail resting on the floor. His hands were bandaged, the burns from the static discharge still healing. Scars crisscrossed his skin where bones had broken and reformed. He was a monster. But he was his monster. As he stared, a familiar sensation prickled at the edge of his awareness. The chaotic growth engine, dormant since the cave, stirred. A system message appeared in his mind, glowing with ominous light, mutation roulette ready for level 11. A sharp, sudden pain lanced through his skull, not like the gradual ache of previous mutations, but a piercing, focused agony. It felt like something was drilling into his brain, rearranging things from the inside. He gasped, gripping the edge of the desk as his vision swam. "What next?" he whispered, the words barely audible. Outside his window, the city stretched under the twilight sky. And somewhere in the shadows, the overarching villain watched, his plans unfolding like a poison vine. The shadowy organization hadn't forgotten their subject. They were coming, and Leo's chaotic evolution was only beginning.